This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. I hope you had a splendid weekend. Punctuated though it was by somewhat unexpected news, perhaps, from the United States or from Iran. I think we may have done it again on Friday. It's weird, isn't it? I can spend, probably best not to count them, but upwards of 10, 15, even sometimes 20 minutes trying to lay out the lie of the land. And the only conclusion, the only thing you can say with certainty with regard to Donald Trump and decision-making process is that you cannot say anything with certainty. Well, that's quite pithy, actually. Pithy, I said, TH. The only thing you can say with certainty is that you cannot say anything with certainty. So looking at the narcissistic lens through which he makes his decisions, or the previous fear of upsetting Vladimir Putin, that one looks perhaps a little bit under strain today. You couldn't come up with a Scooby-Doo about whether or not he was likely to fall into line with Israeli attacks upon Iran, escalate them enormously, or stay true. And this is where we probably have some evidence of never having learned anything. Because you'd have thought, if you were applying the usual tools of analysis, that the number of times Donald Trump had pledged on the campaign trail that he would not be getting involved in anything like what he got involved with over the weekend would be evidence that he was unlikely to get involved with what he got involved with over the weekend. Wouldn't you? You'd have thought, oh man, even as I say the words out loud, there's a little voice in my head going, oh, you silly, silly boy. You'd have thought, in a logical universe, that having repeatedly stated that there would be no more wars, that there would be nothing like the events of this weekend on his watch, you'd have thought in a logical universe that that might hold even the vaguest scintilla of truth, the tiniest thread of reality. But it's proof that even after all these years, what are we now, months into the second term, we still haven't developed an ability to properly recognise the absence of normality. We're still using tools that worked with Joe Biden or even Ronald Reagan, where, tools that worked with George W. Bush. The Rumsfeldian lines about known knowns and known unknowns and unknown knowns and unknown unknowns actually did obey the laws of logic. It might have sounded like gibberish, and it was lampooned as such at the time, but of course in retrospect we know that it wasn't. It wasn't gibberish. It did actually make sense. And the rationale for doing things. George W. Bush's intelligence turned out to be false. The dodgy dossier, the weapons of mass destruction, the 45-minute warning. Saddam Hussein had been in possession of weapons of mass destruction at some point. The idea that he was ever capable of launching an attack upon these shores, fanciful at best. But George W. Bush recognised that in order to bomb a Middle Eastern country, and many people still believe that that was probably in breach of international law, you needed to provide a rationale, you needed to provide a basis, you needed, forgive the simplicity of this analogy, you needed to let the dog see the rabbit. But of course, in Trump land, you don't need to let the dog see anything. You just need to tell them there's a rabbit. It's a huge, huge rabbit. It's the biggest rabbit. It's a rabbit the likes of which and we've destroyed that rabbit. We have destroyed. That's all you need to do. And yet we spent 1, 2, 3 productive, I felt, informative, helpful hours on Friday looking at the options. Hafsa in Cairo was right when she said she was pretty confident he would crack on, and I was wrong when I said I wasn't making a prediction because I can't. I don't possess the facts, but I felt that he probably wouldn't go ahead on this occasion and do it. I realised, partly because of all the things that he has said in the past, supporting the notion that he would not go ahead and do it.
These globalists want to squander all of America's strength, blood, and treasure, chasing monsters and phantoms overseas. In addition, there must also be a complete commitment to dismantling the entire globalist neocon establishment that is perpetually dragging us into endless wars, pretending to fight for freedom and democracy abroad. We should have never gone into the Middle East. We should have never gone into the Middle East. Under my leadership, we will turn the page forever on those foolish, stupid days of never-ending wars. We're rebuilding our military stronger than ever before, and we are not going to deplete it again on stupid, senseless, endless wars. World War III has never been closer than it is right now. We need to clean house of all of the warmongers and America last globalists and the deep state. I am the president who delivers peace. I was the first president in decades who didn't start a war. And the worst, most incompetent, most corrupt president in history is going to drag us into World War III. And this horrible, horrible president is dragging us toward World War III. We're going to be in World War III soon. Because I think we would have been good with Iran. I don't want to do anything bad to Iran. Large sections of the Middle East. I mean, look at the death and destruction that's taken place. And none of this would have happened if I were president. Our opponents join with warmongers and neocons to wage endless wars, these wars that never end. Together we're fighting to secure our borders, end the endless foreign wars, and defend the working people of America. But the Muslim and Arab voters in Michigan and across the country want a stop to the endless wars and a return to peace in the Middle East. That's all they want. Speaking of World War III, I'll keep you out of World War III. What would happen if we had a war? We won't, with me, but you will have World War III, I believe, without me, but we won't have. I will be sure that World War III will not happen. I'm the only one can say it won't happen. But I stand here today, and I'm the only candidate who can make this promise. I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily.
I mean, crikey, I don't know. 2.5 minutes of evidence there that we've learned nothing, but also sniggering a bit at the end at the ludicrousness of it suggests that we haven't learned that lesson either. I don't know. Can you stop finding someone ridiculous, even as he becomes immeasurably dangerous? Sounds like a song lyric, that, or a tongue twister. I do not know. Footballification, how much have we talked about it? It's odd, isn't it? We seem to apply it to ever more serious scenarios. For example, you heard the Defence Minister Luke Pollard on the news bulletin being asked whether he is for or against this activity. You can't answer that question until you've seen the intelligence. I mean, you'd need to be a bear of very little brain not to fully understand that. You can't. We have not been shown the intelligence, so you cannot say whether or not you're in support of the action. If there is proof that Iran was very close to producing nuclear weapons, then the question of whether or not you support, it doesn't get answered by that knowledge, but it changes. There's sort of three positions, really. Iran is nowhere near producing nuclear weapons. Do you support bombing them into oblivion? Iran is very near to producing nuclear weapons, but we can't prove it to you. Do you support bombing them into oblivion, i.e. you're doing it on rumour and hearsay? We're doing it on propaganda. And then option 3, here's the proof. And it's not a dodgy dossier. It has not been assembled in desperation to sanction military activity. Here is incontrovertible proof that hardly anybody could argue with, that Iran was very, very close to assembling nuclear weapons. Look, this proof is so conclusive that you can ignore the fact Benjamin Netanyahu has been claiming since 1992 that Iran was on the brink of producing a nuclear weapon. Here is the proof. So there's 3 possible scenarios. You don't care whether it was close to producing a nuclear weapon. You don't know whether it was close to producing a nuclear weapon, but you trust that guy that we just heard 2.5 minutes of him saying he'd never do the thing he did this weekend. Or you know, because it has been shown to you, it has been proved, that is what intelligence is for, whether or not you are very close to producing a nuclear weapon. And that is, I mean, an extraordinary position that Donald Trump has put the British government in. The British government closest to endorsing the action without actually endorsing the action. They didn't do it from Diego Garcia, but you can apparently ask a question of whether or not you're in support of an action without knowing why it was done, or without knowing whether it was done with good cause. And you can also ask whether we should be prescribing as terrorists an organisation without receiving the information that the Home Secretary is going to use when she tells us why she wants to prescribe them as a terrorist organisation. And I mention all of this because it's a human condition, isn't it? The Sun has got a headline today, and you know the absolute contempt with which they treat their readers is well documented. But they've got a headline today that says "Stick it up your bunker," and then they dedicate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pages to to the story, and you sort of find yourself wondering why. And the answer is footballification. The answer is, however complicated the scenario, however nuanced, however difficult, however many known unknowns there are, or unknown knowns, you find yourself wondering why we need to be so violently partisan, why you need to pick a side, why people can't hold two thoughts in their head at the same time. For example, if you can prove to me that Iran was very close to having a nuclear weapon, then my opinion on what America has done, what the US has done over the course of the weekend, would almost certainly change from where it was when you couldn't prove to me that they had a nuclear weapon. And a lot of my skepticism on this is, of course, based on the absence of intelligence and the fact that this is what has been claimed since 1992. So that's why this desperate gung-ho warmongering attempt to retrospectively justify something that has not been justified is so troubling. But at the same time, you can say that the Iranian regime is pretty hideous. We spoke to people with family in Iran who were on both sides of that coin. We didn't speak to anyone who was sort of wholly supportive of the administration, but we spoke to people who wanted to see it gone, but not as a consequence of outside intervention, and people who wanted to see it gone and would be happy to accept it as a consequence of outside intervention. Where's footballification there? Where's the pick a side, tie your scarf so tightly around your neck that you've cut off the flow of blood to your brain? How does that work? If you've got two people calling for the same ends, but with passionately opposing views on how those ends, what those means to achieve those ends should be. And here's the question that you may find most troubling. How do we know if it's been a success? I've seen one report already that there are 9 separate places in which enriched uranium could have been hidden that haven't been targeted. I don't know how they know. How do we know whether or not it's been a success? And if the question is, why has Trump done it? Then the only answer you have is, I think, that age-old observation that we've made on this program every single time we talk about Israel, that the view that the defense of Israel is of such paramount importance that it justifies anything. You remember the calls we took in the not the earliest days after Hamas launched its hideous October the 7th attack, but when some of us began to wonder whether the point of disproportionality had been reached. You remember where I think Ireland did it on February the 14th, 2024. Other countries already suggest you've gone too far. Look, you had to respond, but you've gone too far. And we would speak to people who, if you pushed them, would come pretty close to conceding that they could live with the eradication of all the people in Gaza. They could live with ethnic cleansing. They could live even perhaps with genocide. That word appeared in the conversation quite quickly. And you realise that was born of a belief that protecting these people, protecting this territory was of such paramount importance that it justified anything. Attack, after all, is the best form of defence. There's a reason why that's a figure of speech. And it seems to me that the United States and much of the West has now bought into that worldview. Netanyahu has successfully groomed the world into believing that he has a right to do anything and everything, up to and including Donald Trump probably bottling it, because I think the braver political move would have been to resist. So once again, Taco, or whatever it is that they call him, on the grounds that he always bottles it. Might seem odd to think that dropping enormous bombs, the like of which nobody else on earth possesses, onto foreign lands is the act of the coward. But I think it would have involved more integrity and more principle to not join in. And that's what he's done. He's bought into the idea that every single thing Israel does is justified. I've spoken at length about where that belief comes from, and why I have some sympathy with it in some circumstances, but not in Gaza at the moment, with 55,000 people dead, 15,000 children. But remember, they're scrupulously careful about not targeting innocent civilians. And quite possibly not in Iran, but to know how bad this is, or how good this is, you need to know what happens next. You need to know what happens next. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. Should we open up the phone lines? I think we probably should. 0345 6060973. I'd really like to ask you how we'll know whether or not this has worked. It's really weird, isn't it? Oh, well, if Iran doesn't launch a nuclear strike on Israel, we'll know that it's worked. But Iran has never launched a nuclear strike on Israel and doesn't have a nuclear capability. Didn't have it last week, doesn't have it this week. How will we know that it's worked? Donald Trump will claim that it's been the most successful military intervention in the history of military interventions, but of course he will. How will we know whether this was a good or a bad idea? I lean towards bad. But I can't say for sure because I haven't got the intelligence. I need to know whether or not I'm talking about something that was justified by intelligence, which I could still disapprove of, or whether I'm talking about something that was not justified by intelligence, which I don't think I could approve of. So it's frustrating, isn't it? The lure of the footballification is great. You want to say, I am sticking my flag in this ground here, but you can't, despite the fact that almost every other member of the media is going to be pretending that you can. You just can't. You can't have an opinion about something that you don't understand. James, have you visited Brexit Britain? All right, you can't have a valid opinion about something if you're not in possession of the facts that you need to develop your opinion. Doesn't matter, let's have a phone in anyway. Are you for it or against it? No facts, no knowledge, no intelligence, no understanding, no nuance. Just pick a flipping side now. Are you for it or against it? Are you in favor? It's just pointless. How will we know whether this was a good thing or a bad thing? And also, examine the three alternative universes. The one where the intelligence does exist, it just goes to a different school. The one where it doesn't exist, and the one where it might exist, but we will never know. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. How will we know? What do you base your projected opinion on? The idea that this history will judge this to have been a good thing. In what circumstances? Or history will judge this to have been a bad thing. In what circumstances? 20 minutes after 10 is the time. I told you it would be a long one, but frankly, you should be grateful it's not longer.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 10. I'll read out one of these and thank you for all of them. Ian's been in touch. So, James, it was so good to hear you back on the BBC at the weekend. You didn't tell us you were going to be on Dead Ringers. No, I didn't, because I didn't know. I don't think Eleanor would let me play the clip. Would that be too self-referential if I start playing clips of people doing impersonations of me on different radio stations? That, even by my standards, that might be a bit up myself. But it was good. I got John Colshaw on full disclosure, but I've already recorded it, unfortunately. Otherwise, I could have taken him to task about the quality of his impersonation. But thank you to everybody who has been in touch in case it hadn't beeped on my radar. That was from Ian. This is from Dave. Morning, James. Netanyahu has been trying for decades to get the US to attack Iran on the basis of preventing the imminent achievement of having a nuclear capability. The difference from other times is that he now has a US president dumb enough to do it. Well, J.D. Vance begs to differ.
And the second thing is, Kristen, I certainly empathize with Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. I understand the concern, but the difference is that back then we had dumb presidents, and now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objectives.
23 minutes after 10 is the time, and there it is. Donald Trump's done this because he's the only one that isn't dumb. Despite the fact that, as Dave points out, that the claims about the imminent arrival of the nuclear capability date back to at least 1992. So, strange question, but in the absence of more intelligence, more information, perhaps the only one that you can ask in good faith is, what are we going to base our judgment on whether this was a good idea or not on? Because you certainly can't answer that question today. If you try to, you end up sounding as daft as J.D. Vance or as unhinged as Donald Trump. So what are we going to base it on? Joe's in Forest Hill to kick things off. Joe, what would you like to say?
I'd like to just take us back to last time Donald Trump was in power, and they were interviewing people in Iran when Donald Trump was last threatening to bomb Iran, and they were breaking down in tears. And they were breaking down, saying, we don't want war, we don't want to die, we know how this will end. And it feels a bit like deja vu. We've got people in the media telling us, we're not going to war, don't worry about it, everything's going to be okay. We're just, we've got to look into stuff, we've got to prepare. And it just feels like deja vu again. It feels like we're going to send our young to die abroad somewhere in the Middle East again.
No, well, crikey, never say never. But the only thing you can say with any certainty is that you can't say anything with any certainty. I cannot conceive of that happening. I mean, for one reason and one reason only. There's no 9/11 in the background.
Well, you know, in this day and age, with how everything is going and the power that Mossad had to bomb half of Lebanon with mobile devices and pagers and stuff, I'm sure there's something like that will happen.
Do you know what you just did?
What's that?
I'm not going to thank you for it, mate. I just added a silent yet.
Yeah.
To my observation, I said there's no 9/11 in the background. Yet. So does the prospect of an Iranian-sponsored terror attack upon a Western city feel to you higher or lower than it did last week?
I don't feel safer. I don't know about you, James.
I got a colleague who said they nearly cycled to work today because they didn't want to come in on the London Underground. And I you know, you hesitate to tell people to stop being silly, but I did. I said, stop being silly. But do you? I mean, that's the question, and I think you've answered it. But I'll ask you again. I'll look for a yes or a no. Do you feel safer than you did last week, or not, or less safe?
I feel less safe, and I think the millions and millions and millions of Muslims in the Middle East that have suffered for the past 30 years already feel even less safe than we do over here, because they've seen it happen time and time again throughout the Middle East.
So absent another Gulf War, what would be the criteria by which we decide? Because I don't think there is one. I mean, spoiler alert, if you say, well, we'll know it's worked if Iran failed to launch a nuclear weapon, but they've never launched a nuclear weapon, so it's almost like a philosophical mind game, isn't it? It's proof that it's worked. It's not proof of anything. What would proof be that it was a good thing to do?
We've had the proof. We've had all the investigations. We've had all the IE or whatever it's called. They've done all of their investigations. They've clearly come back and told us that they're nowhere near ready to make a nuclear weapon.
No, but they are higher. They're higher than they need to be for anything else. I mean, it remains an ambition. But the problem with that is that the second bit of it remaining an ambition is that an ambition that they would fulfil. They'd become the only nuclear power, except the United States of America, to actually use one of these weapons. It's as if we suspend the notion of mutually assured destruction, which applies to everybody else, from Vladimir Putin to Kim Jong-un to Donald Trump, to us, to the UK, but we suspend it on their part. And you look at the map of the Middle East and it becomes even more bonkers for them to contemplate using a nuclear bomb than it would for countries who do what the United States do and direct them at countries that are thousands of miles away. Thank you, Joe. It's a good point. I mean, this is what I mean about there being, you can't say anything with certainty except the fact that you can't say anything with certainty. I can't believe I'm the first person that's ever said that, but I'm going to be saying it a lot in the future, and I don't think there's going to be any form of ground war. I cannot imagine for a moment UK troops going. US troops, you'd have thought highly unlikely, and I think it's still highly unlikely, borderline impossible. But, you know, I guess in a logical universe, Trump wouldn't have done what he did this weekend. Delighted though Rupert Murdoch is, just for the avoidance of doubt. Rupert Murdoch and people who spend their lives with their heads stuck up his backside, absolutely over the moon about this today, but of course they can't tell you why, because they haven't seen the intelligence either. Are you for it or against it? Well, what? Dropping massive bombs without any intelligence? I'm probably against that. Dropping massive bombs based entirely on propaganda? I'm almost certainly against that. Dropping massive bombs with decent intelligence? I might actually be in favour of that. I can't say for sure, because there are other factors, there are other moving parts in that process, that decision-making process. But being in favour of it, in the absolute absence of any justification, that's probably madness. But hey-ho, it's the kind of madness that took us to war in Iraq, and how many of us fell for that at the time? Don't text me to tell me that you didn't. Just give yourself a little pat on the back and have an extra roast potato with your dinner. It's coming up to 10:29. Matt in Hull will be up first after the news headlines. At the moment, I don't know that there'll be room or time to talk about anybody else, but I can tell you I've detected something straight out of Tufton Street, if you know what that phrase means. What happens when Tufton Street marries the Fleet Street tradition of a Sunday for Monday that I told you about some time ago? And it's worse now than it was when I spent 10 minutes on a national newspaper 147 years ago. the criteria to get something into the paper is much lower on a Sunday for Monday, because you're running a skeleton staff, and traditional news, obviously a lot of people are having a day off. Massive bombs dropping on Iran notwithstanding, it just presents an opportunity for those weird groups that describe themselves as think tanks to influence even more public discourse with their secretly funded quotes, research, end quotes. I got a couple of cracking examples for you in the course of today's programme. But before all of that, Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:32 is the time. Stick it up your bunker is the sort of attitude that Rupert Murdoch's Sun newspaper takes to the events over the weekend. It's got a touch of the up yours de laws to it, hasn't it? The idea that the British public is so easily manipulated into another attack upon a Middle Eastern country by the United States, that you can just use some provocative language and pictures of Donald Trump, and I don't know that the British public is as heavily engaged in it as Rupert Murdoch wants them to be, but when he's dedicating 10 pages of the Sun newspaper to the United States attacking Iran, then you could be allowed to worry. You could be forgiven for beginning to worry that the first call we took from Joe, speaking of the beginning of a process rather than the end, may not only be on the cards but also part of the plan. The problem is that we're talking about Donald Trump, so immediately you remember that there is no plan. I've already played you 2.5 minutes of him insisting that he and he alone could guarantee that he would never do as president exactly what he's done over the course of the last 48 hours. And similarly, the people to whom he's appointed to high positions, most notably his intelligence chief Tulsi Gabbard, they're in complete disagreement with each other.
What intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
I mean, that is, I think she might have fallen into line now, but that is a moment that, I know I go on about it, but the complete corruption of normality, it's worth listening to that again. Who in the intelligence community told you that? And this is a moment of parody. This could be on Dead Ringers. This is close to unbelievable, and yet this is the new normal.
What intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
Who in the intelligence community told you that? Your director of national intelligence. Well, she's wrong. At which point anyone with a brain goes, okay, show me what you've got. What is the intelligence you're basing your opinion on? Because until you do that, the idea that you can be violently in favour or opposed to this action is obviously ridiculous. Tragically, for patriotic Brits, we don't know. Our defence minister doesn't know, our prime minister doesn't know. They are not party to the intelligence that quite possibly doesn't exist, and until they are, how on earth are they supposed to know whether they're for or against something? So Starmer can say removing nuclear capability from Iran is a good thing, and the headlines will say he's endorsed it, and he has certainly come closer to endorsing it than Macron has, or Germany. Merz in Germany, but until you know why they've done it, it used to be that you had to make a dodgy dossier to justify a Middle Eastern offence. Now you don't need any justification at all, except the say-so of the Mango Mussolini, who 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago was saying the polar opposite of what he's saying now, and who is convinced that his own director of national intelligence is not the person that you go to for national intelligence. Matt's in Hull in East Yorkshire. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hello. Well, in terms of the question of whether it's been successful,
how will we know when we know whether or not it has been successful?
In the course of talking with your producer, we both arrived at, until you get inspectors in there, we're not going to know for certain. But the point I'd called in to make, yes. And again, I said to your producer, I wish I didn't have to know all this military stuff. I'm supposed to be international relations, foreign policy,
yes.
security, and I unfortunately have to know all this military stuff, which isn't very interesting. But if you look at the stats of what those weapons are capable of, they're really not capable of damaging that facility because they can't go deep enough. So you've got the facility way underground, and then on top of that you've got pretty substantial mountains, and the idea that they can get through all of that is just not likely. And then when this was brought up before the attack, when Trump first mentioned these weapons, they said, we'll just drop 2 on the same spot, and the first one will go so far down, and then the second one, well, good luck with that. I mean, trying to drop 2 munitions on an identical spot is it's beyond credibility.
I mean, that throws the field even wider, doesn't it? Because there's no way they don't know that. I'm going to trust your analysis of the situation. You've been reliable in the past. But if you know that, there's no way they don't know that, which means they've done it and they've done it knowing a massive success was very unlikely, but knowing they were going to claim it anyway, which makes the question I'm asking possibly even more acute, but at the same time even harder to answer. What would a genuinely objective analysis of whether or not this was a good idea look like?
It was worse still. Trump's now left himself nowhere to go because he said, we've completely wiped out this capability. There's no way.
We're back to the 24-hour cycle, aren't we? It doesn't matter what he says because he's just about getting through the next 24 hours like Boris Johnson was during COVID.
But if you remove that capability, you've then removed any justification you've got for continuing to attack. So you basically shot yourself in the foot. You've gone, well, it's gone now. So why are you still attacking them then? Well, it might not be gone. It might be somewhere else. It might be.
And there's no circumstances in which we can say with certainty that it was a mistake. I mean, I'm hearing Orwell's perpetual war playing in the background throughout these conversations. And, of course, it suits both sides to be in a state of perpetual war sometimes. It's just a little bit hard to see what the other side is here now. But the impossibility of pointing to something that proves it was a failure. So if we do, God forbid, get terror attacks on Western soil again, or they ramp up to anything like the scale that we saw on July the 7th in this city or on September the 11th in New York, and then the second generation of those sort of attacks, the trucks ploughing into crowds of people in Nice and elsewhere, if that were to happen again, and this time the sponsor or the cause célèbre led back to Iran, that doesn't mean it was a mistake in the minds of the people in favour of it. That just means it proves that the attacks were necessary before the retaliation had happened.
Yeah. And you talked about the Sun's coverage. I mean, I would venture that a lot of Sun readers are going to be the kind of people who very much object to refugees and asylum seekers turning up in this country, and yet they're being encouraged to support an action that's very likely to cause a huge influx of refugees into Europe. If it does get out of hand, you're going to get, Syria, which was a much smaller population, and we had a couple of million people displaced from there at least. You had 10 million Ukrainians displaced. How can you say, I'm all for this action, but if it creates refugees, I don't want them coming here? It's that weird.
Well, that involves escalation, doesn't it? I mean, people are fleeing Tehran and not necessarily fleeing the entire country, although many are. They'll be doing so in the expectation of coming back quite quickly. This is the problem, isn't it? Is using the traditional tools of intelligence and analysis is largely pointless, because you'll say, Netanyahu could do anything, absolutely anything, and Donald Trump now fits into the category of somebody that isn't going to follow let alone international law, but just the rules of the normal rules of engagement. Even George W. Bush had to come up with a dossier to justify what he did. Trump hasn't even done that.
Well, and I mentioned again to your producer, if you remember the JCPOA when Trump left that, if you think about what that agreement was, that was Iran agreeing to relinquish some of the rights that every other signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty has. Yeah. And Iran said, yes, okay, if it means we don't get attacked, we will give up those rights. And when Trump left it on a hunch, he didn't offer any evidence. And all the other signatories said, please don't do that. This is working. It's making progress. And then he's done the same thing now. He's saying, I don't care what the intelligence says. I've got this feeling that Iran is...
He's done it on vibes.
Yeah. And there are mechanisms for enforcing the treaties. There are.
Well, that's why Israel aren't signatories to it.
Yeah. So Trump's attack, it's breaches international law because he's attacked nuclear facilities. That's a straight no-no. It breaches American law because he's done it without authority from Congress, and it's unconstitutional action. So all on a hunch, all on a...
Or on intelligence that is absolutely undeniable but goes to a different school.
exactly,
and which his director of intelligence insisted mere days ago did not actually exist.
And bearing in mind, so they have about 17 separate intelligence agencies in the States, and she's briefed by all of them, and then they have a sort of summary of the total findings, and there's not one shred that says they were anywhere close.
And when Tulsi Gabbard seems to be the most sensible person in the room, there is, of course, another argument that that's when you really should panic. But the idea, of course, I may have misspoken to Matt earlier when I suggested that Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump would have as sophisticated an understanding of matters military as he clearly does. That was probably a little bit unfair on Matt. 10:43 is the time. Boris is in Luxembourg, not that one. Boris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Boris here, yes.
Hello.
It has been an absolute disaster what the United States has done here. I know you're focusing on whether the bombs actually exploded something or not.
No, that was the last caller. I'm looking at the broader kind of
That's
picture.
beside the point. That's beside the point. The big point here is just, and I'm sorry if I'm going to get a little bit technical here with some numbers, but you know that from past calls that I do that.
Yes.
So let's just do a couple of calculations. In order to build a nuclear device, you need about 20 kilos of uranium enriched to level 90. That gives you 60 kilo TNT explosions. To put that into perspective, the bomb that the Americans dropped on Hiroshima was only 15. So the device of 20 kilos uranium enriched to 90 level is 4 times more powerful. Would wipe out Tel Aviv, would wipe out Haifa, or wherever the Iranians would want to drop this. Now, how long does it take you to get up there? If you have 1,000 centrifuges working for 20 days, you can take an unenriched kilo of uranium and enrich it up to 90%. It only takes you 20 days. The Iranians had more than 10,000 centrifuges. So this is the risk that we are facing. Now, are getting these centrifuges difficult nowadays to get? Building a centrifuge, once you know how to build it, is a thing that costs you $500, not more. To put that into perspective, every single time the Israelis, in order to defend themselves, shoot off an arrow, one of those arrow missiles, which is worth $2.5 million, that's the equivalent of 5,000 centrifuges. So even if the bomb has hit, and we don't know, like the earlier caller said, whether this was a success or not, and I don't think we'll find out for a long time. We don't know whether the Iranians were smart enough to take the uranium that they had enriched and the centrifuges out. But even if we were lucky and we got somehow through, it's not going to take the Iranians a long time to rebuild these centrifuges. Now, if that is the case, what have we done? We've basically taken a program where we had at least some visibility, and we've now put it underground. If the Iranians are smart, they will put these centrifuges not in one location, but they'll bundle them together in maybe numbers of thousands or 500 in one location, then another. And good luck trying to find where those centrifuges are going to be in the future.
With an added narrative of self-defense, of course.
With an added narrative, yes, of self-defense. Now, how far were the Iranians? We know they had about 300 kilos already of uranium-60, enriched up to 60%. And to go from there to the 90% is relatively straightforward. So we are in big trouble now. Now, in order to do something, James, in this world, as a country, as a person, you need the means, and you also need the intentions of doing it. The means the Iranians have. You cannot bomb a country of over 90 million people with this knowledge back to the Stone Age in order to stop them from building a centrifuge that costs you $500. That's all it costs to make these centrifuges for the Iranians. It's nothing. So we cannot work on the means of building these centrifuges. So we must work on the intentions. By bombing them and by continue fighting with them, we give them all the intentions in order to build the bomb for their own defense. That is just a horrible geopolitical position we've put ourselves in. So this strike that Trump is celebrating so much was probably their biggest political blunder that they've had. They've copied Pearl Harbor and they got nothing for it. It's terrible.
Yeah, but apart from that, I have to try and see some light in these moments, Boris. I don't know if you've seen the graph from the Institute for Science and International Security that the Financial Times published recently, but it shows Iran's nuclear activity referencing precisely what you've talked about, installed centrifuges, and it has on the up axis it has blue for actual sites and red for planned sites. It was tootling along until the JCPOA nuclear deal was implemented in January of 2016, and then it went off a cliff. Then it dropped to negligible. And then in May 2018, Trump withdrew, and it carried on flatlining for a while, and then it has increased exponentially up until May 2025, when it is by a factor of several 100%, the highest it has ever been. So he had already played a crucial role in increasing the nuclear activity that he claims he had little choice but to try to stop. But as you say, the consequence of his claims to have stopped it may end up exacerbating and accelerating the process still further. Oh boy. Boris, thank you. As always, 10:48 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here you go. You can't negotiate with a jihadist ideology. It's a death cult. That is the crux of the issue, writes Ben. And that's fine, mate. You're perfectly entitled to that view, but it's a view you can only arrive at if you're either ignorant of or don't care about the facts. You're not talking about a jihadist ideology when you're talking about the JCPOA, when you're talking about the negotiated nuclear deal that Iran were more or less, they were abiding by until Trump unilaterally withdrew. Why would Trump unilaterally blow that up? And as Boris has said, he was warned at the time by all the other signatories what would happen if he did, or at least why he shouldn't. And then the graph, I'll share it on Blue Sky actually, but the graph from the Institute for Science and International Security shows an exponential increase. I think I've used that word correctly for once. An exponential increase in nuclear activity in regards to the number of installed centrifuges at all sites in Iran. So, it is dozy propaganda to claim that you can't negotiate. The proof, the evidence is there. The bloke who refused to negotiate, Ben, was Donald Trump. 10:49 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:52 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it's a lonely furrow, isn't it? But it has been for years. There's another story about the last thing that we arguably provided some of the only truly level-headed coverage of in the news today. I'll give you a clue. It begins with B. I may bring that to your attention a little later. Is Iran vows revenge on US is the front page of the Time. Trump's bunker busters, quotes, obliterate, end quotes, nuclear sites, and that is in quotes because that's what he says, but there is as yet nothing to confirm it. And Tehran votes to choke world oil supply. The geography of Iran, one commentator today points out, is arguably more tactically advantageous to them than any of the weaponry that they may or may not possess. And of course, rockets raining down on Israel as well, although support for Donald Trump and Netanyahu among the Israeli population, in all the reports I've seen, runs very, very high. Because I suppose in a sense they had their September the 11th on October the 7th. It just didn't provide a rationale for the US or the UK or the coalition, or the whatever it was that we called the countries drawn together to oppose the axis of evil. It didn't deliver that sort of impetus, although Joe Biden warned at the time, didn't he? He said, don't let this be your 9/11. Do you remember? Acknowledging that the overreaction to 9/11 had brought misery to the world, avoidable misery to the world, the Middle East and, of course, beyond. And he said, don't let it be your 9/11. A Democrat US president saying that, and here we are now watching a Republican US president act in a way that is terribly similar to the attacks upon Iraq, which were justified, of course, by the attacks upon New York on September the 11th. 10:54 is the time. John is in Swindon. John, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that what this moron has done in the White House has made us all less safe. They don't need a nuclear bomb. They just need nuclear material. And they can make a massive dirty bomb. And they could plant it anywhere in the world. Put it on a container ship, in a lorry, whatever. I used to work at Aldermaston many years ago, our nuclear establishment in Berkshire. I wasn't a scientist. I had to help move the material around. Ooh. So I know how dangerous that stuff is. Yes. And I mean, if I tell you that the safety systems are such that if I wore a luminous watch, it would set the system off.
Really?
That's the level of safety they work with.
Well, I mean, not to make light of your contribution, but good. Of all the places in all the world where I don't think you can have too much health and safety, Aldermaston would be fairly near the top of the list.
Quite. And now, the thing is, what he's done, Iran was talking to Europe, it was talking to the rest of the world, it was negotiating. However despicable a regime it is, and it is despicable, they are running a country. They rely on other countries to trade with. They rely on other countries to keep their population in check, basically, because the Iranians enjoy consumer products. They enjoy the internet.
And they've got huge economic problems at the moment. There was a national strike about a fortnight ago, 3 weeks ago, I think.
Quite. Now, they rely on that. And now, if you back that regime into a corner and they do something desperate, it will make 9/11 look like a tea party. Because they have the nuclear material. They don't need a nuclear bomb. The number of terrorist organisations they support, they could put it into New York, they could put it into anywhere. And that's my big worry. I don't worry about them having a nuclear bomb so much, because we can control that, we can inspect it. But nuclear material, it can be spread anywhere. And we know from open satellite intelligence that before those sites were bombed, he gave them, 60 days or something? Yeah. There were loads of lorries to and from them. So, was it Boris was saying about the centrifuges? They probably removed them.
Well, I mean, they may have removed the material. The graph that I've stuck up on Blue Sky is absolutely extraordinary when it comes to the speed and the volume of building that's happened since Trump pulled out of the JCPOA. But what that agreement included was a series of provisions that Iran would undertake for specified periods of time. 13 years, Iran agreed to eliminate its stockpile of medium-enriched uranium, cut its stockpile of low-enriched uranium by 98%, and reduce by about two-thirds the number of its gas centrifuges. And it was working. I mean, the evidence that it was working is the evidence of your own eyes and ears. Trump pulled out of it on vibes. I think it was only Israel and Saudi Arabia that objected to it at the time. Trump then pulled out of it, whether out of spite because it was negotiated by Obama's people, or whether out of vibes, or just whether out of on a whim. I do not know. It had precisely the effect that experts warned it would have. And now somehow he's casting himself as the bloke who's standing up to the problem that he created.
I mean, he's got the attention span of a goldfish. We know that, but it is absolutely horrifying what he's done to me. I came down yesterday morning. I heard the news, and I felt like crying. I really did. You know, I'm no friend of Iran.
Sure. You can be a friend of the Iranian people, just as you can be a friend of Israeli people without being a friend of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, I know several Iranians in the past who actually fled when the mullahs came to power, but. The Iranian people they are a civilized people. You know, it's a civilization about thousands of years, and they've got this despicable regime in place, and they're held in check by the Republican Guard and people like that. But to actually do this to them, and you make them desperate, I dread to think what will happen next.
Well, we all do, and even more so now than before you started talking. People will be dreading to think it even more so. But I mean, in a way, it speaks to the question we're asking, doesn't it? Because if Iran were to sponsor some hideous attack upon Western soil, most obviously the United States of America, but I don't think we're off the hook, then that could be used both ways. It could be used as proof that Trump made a terrible mistake, or proof that they're such a morally bankrupt regime that it was the right thing to do to try to nip their capabilities in the bud. Even though, so we'll be back where we are now. There's no certainty here, which is what makes the false certainty of the hawks and the false certainty of some people on the other side of the argument so unhelpful. John.
Well, even that Marjorie Taylor Greene, she came out against it. She talk about a stop clock being right twice. But yeah.
I don't know where that phrase comes from, but I watched Withnail and I at the cinema last night for the first time in about 30 years with one of my daughters, and it appears there. So that may be where I got the line from, or where we all got the line from. Speaking of cultural influences, thank you, John. I also went back to 1984 recently, after I told you, didn't I, last week, after talking about perpetual war and wondering at its relevance in this kind of context. It certainly suits Netanyahu. In fact, it doesn't just suit Netanyahu, it's the only thing that keeps him out of jail, is perpetual war. Public sympathy, international sympathy, crucially, had been hemorrhaged in Gaza. It was more or less over on the world stage, support for what they were doing in Gaza. So the question of why he chose that moment to launch attacks upon Iran is really easy to answer. I know that I'm falling into my own trap again if I ask you this question, but what on earth explains Trump's decision?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11. So listen, as I say throughout and from the very beginning, although apparently this rather obvious observation hasn't reached James Cartledge, the Shadow Defence Secretary, you can't be in favour or opposed to something until you are party to the justification for it, the rationale for it. In fact, that clip from the Shadow Defence Secretary was pretty frightening, even by the standards of Kemi Badenoch's party, he claiming to know what the justification is. The justification at the moment is coming from the man who invented the term fake news to describe the truth. It's coming from the man who invented the phrase alternative facts to describe facts. You're perfectly entitled to choose to believe him, but to claim that that provides a justification for the kind of attack that we've seen in Iran over the course of the weekend is I mean, look, I don't use the word advisedly, it's bloody terrifying. He's the Shadow Defence Secretary. He could be in possession of our nuclear codes at some point in the admittedly dim and distant future, but you can't be in favour of something if you don't know why it happened. It's not enough to simply say, particularly when you know that Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying it since 1992, and because you're listening to this programme, you now know that Trump's decision to pull out of the JCPOA in January of 2016 gave the mother of all turbocharges to Iran's nuclear activity. He literally created the thing that he's now using to claim justifies the attack. Unless you see the proof, you can't be in favour of it or against it. And when you've seen the proof, your opinion... I think I'm going to be saying this a lot, aren't I? It's going to be a bit like trying to explain why they don't need us more than we need them to the terminally boneheaded. But you cannot have a strong view on something without strong information, okay? Unless you're treating it like a game of football, and unless you are, and that's what the Sun is trying to do today, create the idea that it's us against them. It didn't need that much effort in the context of the Falklands when their front page was stick it up your junta, because General Galtieri, in sort of desperate attempts at self-preservation, decided to invade sovereign British territory occupied by British people. So stick it up your junta was effective, but probably not necessary. Stick it up your bunker, and 10 pages of warmongering across the pages of Rupert Murdoch's Sun today is designed to manufacture consent for something. God only knows what. Hopefully just retrospective consent for what happened at the weekend. But they work on the principle that you can have strong opinions without having evidence and facts to back them up. And so does everybody who indulges in that kind of journalism, whether it's in print, on the telly or on the radio. You don't need facts to have a strong opinion. Are you for it or against it? Donald Trump says he's done it because of this. Please ignore the fact that the man couldn't lie straight in bed and base your opinion on the presumption that he's telling the absolute unvarnished truth, even though he can't prove it to you. It's nuts. The more you think about it, the more mad it is, right? You've got to have a strong opinion. You've got to be for it or against it. But I can't tell you why we did it. Well, I can tell you why we did it, but I can't prove that it's true. Oh, and by the way, I'm Mr. Alternative Facts and Mr. Fake News. And now you've got the Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartledge, saying we should be fully supportive of it because we agree with their justification, which we haven't seen. You agree with what, Mr. Cartledge? You agree with what? You agree with Donald Trump's claims? Or Benjamin Netanyahu's, because they go back to 1992, and so far none of them have come true. So what is this justification that you've seen and that you agree with? Unless it's a justification that you haven't seen. Spoiler alert, it is. He hasn't seen it, which means that you're relying on Mr. Fake News, Mr. Alternative Facts, Mr. I won the election, Mr. I set a murderous mob on my own vice. You're relying on him. He's your reliable source in these matters. Well, at least he's backed up by his own Director of National Intelligence, right? Because that at least would give James Cartledge some grounds for claiming that the justification for the attack is something that he agrees with.
What intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
But James Cartledge knows better. He knows better than the US intelligence community. He knows better than the Director of Intelligence. How? I mean, are we really in the country now where the shadow defense secretary is getting shown information that the director of national intelligence in the United States isn't being shown? Or is James Cartledge perhaps talking out of his bottom? I'll leave you to decide. Speaking of bottoms, let's move back to Donald Trump and the question of why he has done it. So it was easy last week, and I know. I am deploying the same, or I'm potentially falling into the same trap that we fell into on Friday. I'm still, because I can't shake it. I can't shake. You can't. What can you do? What do you do if you give up on trying to use the traditional tools of understanding, the traditional tools of analysis to analyse? What do you use instead? You might as well turn into them. You might as well just throw a bunch of jelly beans in the air and base your opinion upon the order in which they land. What do you do if you don't have meaningful, evidence-based discourse? You become a Donald Trump fan, I guess. So it is easy, in the absence of intelligence that proves this time Benjamin Netanyahu was telling the truth, and we should probably dig that clip out again, of the number of times he's claimed in the past that Iran was about to produce a nuclear weapon. I think that's very relevant to the conversation that we're having. So, and listen, we acknowledge throughout that it may be that this time there is a wolf. Just because the boy cried wolf 100 times in the past does not mean that when the wolf turns up, the wolf won't be real. But in the absence of that intelligence, in the absence of that proof, in the absence of that data, it's easy to see why Benjamin Netanyahu did what he did. Because he has hemorrhaged international support in Gaza, the continuing persecution, ethnic cleansing, for many people genocide, that he is undertaking there has become unconscionable. For many people it became unconscionable a long time ago, but the wheels of international morality move ever slow, and he has lost it. He has lost international support across most of the world, and he needs to keep his job. Because the minute he leaves his job, he's in court. He's in the dock on corruption charges and quite possibly faces jail. So he's gone into Iran. This is Occam's razor. It may be when more evidence becomes available, this theory becomes ridiculous. But according to the evidence that we have now, that is the best available explanation of what has happened. Please don't listen to me. Just stick it up your bunker. You see how it works? Here is some measured, thoughtful explanation. But on the other side of the table, you've got someone shouting, stick it up your bunker. That's how it works. So if more evidence comes forward, if more facts emerge, then that could be a ridiculous suggestion. That could be rendered ridiculous, that explanation. Why is he doing it? To keep himself in power and quite possibly out of jail. So that's quite easy. Occam's razor lends itself quite effectively to that explanation. Why has Donald Trump done it? Particularly given the 2.5 minutes and the 20 years of opposition to precisely the kind of activity that we witnessed this weekend. Why do you, and this is moving squarely into the realms of speculation and attempted explanation, but why has Donald Trump done it? Listen, I didn't think he would. You may have noticed if you're listening to this programme for the first time that we have extraordinary callers when we wade into difficult waters. I think that was demonstrated quite perfectly in the first hour. Truly extraordinary. Kind of callers that other radio stations, other radio programmes have producers on the phone to, booking desperately in pursuit of the kind of contributions that we now get unprompted, really. But it was Hafsa, actually, in Cairo, who explained why she thought this would happen. I disagreed with her on some other stuff and still would, but she thought this would happen. I can't fully remember why. But it is, of course, a consequence of treating Donald Trump like a normal politician. And it's odd, isn't it? The people who despise him because he's so abnormal, and the people who love him because he's so abnormal. And we can't even agree on how important the truth is. So why has Donald Trump done it? It's easy to see why Benjamin Netanyahu has done it. I'm not sure he had much choice except calling an election and possibly ending up in court. Well, definitely ending up in court, possibly ending up in jail. Why do you think Donald Trump did it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Quick shout to Craig. Sometimes I can't believe the stuff I need to double explain, but then I rather arrogantly, Craig, forget that you're not fully focused on the programme. You might be listening to me in the background while you're busy getting on with something more important. I know that alternative facts was invented to describe fiction and lies. That was the point I was actually making. So the guy that you're trusting for the rationale, the justification, even the success of the attacks upon Iran is the same guy that claimed he won the election in 2020 and claims that fake news is made up when it's real, or that alternative facts, lies, are truth. And that is all just counting. None of that is an opinion. That's all true. All of the proof that he's a massive liar is on the record. It's proven. So he may be telling the truth on this occasion, just as Benjamin Netanyahu may be telling the truth on this occasion, but he definitely wasn't telling the truth on all these occasions.
The deadline for attaining this goal is getting extremely close. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. By next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb. The foremost sponsor of global terrorism could be weeks away from having enough enriched uranium for an entire arsenal of nuclear weapons. That would place a militant Islamic terror regime weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
So that was October 1996, September 2002, September 2012, March 2015, October 2015 and June 2025. That's the recordings we could find. If you allow paper-based claims, I think you can take it back to 1992. Makes it easy to speculate on why Netanyahu launched the attacks upon Iran using a rationale that is the best part of 50 years old and hasn't been true yet. Why did Donald Trump? Because he ain't produced any evidence or intelligence either. Why do you think he did it? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 11. There are many reasons to watch the programme on YouTube later today, not least the fact that I've grown quite a lot of beetroot. And I've started putting it in my morning libation. So I stick a beetroot in the liquidizer when I'm making a drink that I normally forget to drink, or so usually leave it at home. But today I've actually remembered it, and I think I've currently got a beetroot moustache. So it is another reason to tune into the YouTube thing later, because I won't be able to rectify the situation. You can also check out my rather fetching new hairstyle, which nobody's noticed at work. I won't be able to rectify the situation until about 11:30. So just a quick heads up for you there. It is a rather more serious matter to which we are turning our attention next. There is a problem, of course, a rather obvious problem, a problem that perhaps we fell victim to on Friday, of using traditional tools to analyse the actions of Donald Trump, a man so completely detached from normal politics, from honesty, truth, evidence-based decision-making, reality, completely detached from any concept of agreed reality, that trying to work out why he's doing what he's doing is tricky to the point of pointless. But I don't know what else you do. I don't think it is pointless. And even if the answer is he did it because of his horoscope, it's better than the vacuum that you would be left with otherwise. So that's the question that I'm asking. And Theo can have first crack at answering it. Theo in Crouch End, what do you reckon?
Good morning. So Trump, I think you actually have two questions here. I think, why did Trump do this? And then why did the US establishment, sort of the apparatchiks behind him, agree with this?
I think I can answer the second bit, but I can't answer the first bit. So you do the first bit. The
first bit, okay. Well, the second bit's easier. But the first bit, he wants to be seen as winning. He is not. He is not thinking strategically. I have a useless master's degree in international security, and trying to apply that to Trump is complete waste of time. He has no international relations theory that he is applying. The best way, maybe, would be to see what the ratings would look like if he were to do something. And then if it looks like the ratings will spike and that more people will talk about him, perhaps at least in his base in the United States in a positive light, then that may be the more likely action.
And if Rupert Murdoch's son is dedicating 10 pages to this in London this morning, what on earth is Fox News doing? And that's actually, that's not a rhetorical question. I genuinely don't know. But under your analysis and looking at the Sun, I'm going to take a punt on the fact that Fox News is all for it.
Oh, almost certainly. I haven't had a look at Fox News today. Somebody please tell us, yeah.
So that would be it. It's simply self-preservation. So it's the same reason as Netanyahu, albeit in a slightly different way. True or false, Theo? On the 9th of October 2012, a future US president wrote, now that Obama's poll numbers are in tailspin, watch for him to launch a strike in Libya or Iran. He is desperate. True or false?
You've got me there. I'm going to go with true.
You're going to go with Trump, and you'd be right. You'd be absolutely right. I mean, it's funny and it's not funny at the same time, isn't it?
His whole campaign was you laugh or you'll cry. His whole campaign was run on a peace ticket, and for the last few hundred days, he's been desperately trying, failing to get what he calls peace in Ukraine, which most people would call a sort of surrender. And he's gotten bored with that. He can't do it. So he's just going to move on and go on to attempting to achieve peace in the Middle East through doing what perhaps the apparatchiks behind him have suggested. Well, it's something they've wanted to do for a very long time. I remember during the McCain-Obama campaign, McCain being a much better man than Trump in every way. Even McCain was suggesting, well, if Iran were to get close to a nuclear weapon, then we'd bomb them. So this is something that the American right has been sort of itching to do for a fair while.
I misunderstood when you said apparatchiks. You're talking about the hawks whose names we don't know. I was thinking about the political appointments behind him who've undergone 180 degree. I mean, they've turned around so quickly. They've all got whiplash. The Gabbards and the Vances and the rest of them. But we know why they're doing what they're doing, because they are bought and sold. They know that if they fall out with him, they'll do what is known in the trade as a musk. They'll be musked.
Well, it's interesting how some of the other MAGA lot, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, have done the opposite.
Yes.
And I've always wondered where they get some of their money from. But
well, we know. I mean, I think in at least one of those cases, we have some idea of where some of it has come from over the years. Theo, thank you. So that, I mean, there it is. Again, it's a normal, like Theo said, you can have a master's degree in international security and still not have a Scooby-Doo what Donald Trump is playing at, because it does, and that's not because, education's bad, or because, you've wasted your time at university. As the kind of people who write headlines like "stick it up your bunker" would have you believe, even as they privately acknowledge the opposite to be true, it's because there is no rationale, there's no ideology, there's no tactic, there's no point to it except self-interest. And if it is as simple as Theo describes it, then the self-interest is a sort of watered-down version of Benjamin Netanyahu's. Benjamin Netanyahu attacks Iran because it keeps him out of jail. Donald Trump attacks Iran because it distracts the US public from the consequences of his economic policies and his failed deportations. Okay, here's a question. The Columbia University graduate who was a massive cause célèbre in the early days of the administration. He was arrested for opinions expressed on campus at Columbia University, support for the Palestinian people. He was released this weekend. How mad do I sound when I wonder whether Donald Trump would have done what he did if the bloke that he claimed would never be released hadn't been released this weekend? I know, I'm just saying. I'm just illustrating how hard it is to have, what would you describe them as, sensible conversations about an insensible man. Theo, thank you. Balama is in Lambeth. Balama, twice in 2 weeks, you spoil me, Mr. Ambassador. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. If I had called on Friday and I was tempted to call, I would have betted my bottom dollar that Trump was going to go ahead with this attack.
Okay. And
it was because of a line you used on Friday. Trump does whatever makes him feel biggest.
Yeah.
And he was faced with two options. It is either to go through the diplomatic route, something that has worked for the past 40 years, or to go with the strike. The diplomacy route is painful, it is slow, and it is going to share the credit. Europe is going to participate, other participants will participate, Qatar and others, and the credit will be shared. So Trump will not take the whole credit. And he wants to take the whole credit for everything, even things that are not done with him or with his endorsement or even with his knowledge. If they are good, then he would take the credit. And so if he went through the diplomatic route, Gulf countries will share the credit, European countries will share the credit, but he wants to do something that only him will take the credit for. And I think the strike is the only option for him. But also, when this started...
Well, that presumes it will work. So that knocks us out of the 20... The answer to the question involving the idea that he only cares about the next 24 hours. You're suggesting he's got his eye on a rather longer game. I think you are.
No, I mean, so even whether it's longer or shorter, and I am saying diplomacy is longer, is the longer game, is the painful game, is the one that, but then the strike took place within 24 hours, I mean, less than 24 hours, and he took the credit, and so he wants this quick win, but also quick win that will give him the whole credit, not anyone else. But it doesn't,
of course, and the other thing that I miss is that it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. He's claiming the win. He's doing the lap of honour.
Yeah, and I can tell you even Netanyahu will agree with you on that, James, because when he came out, he took the whole credit. Even Netanyahu was just portrayed as a friend, but not as the person who should take the credit, even though when he started 10 days ago, Trump said we didn't endorse him and we didn't participate with him, or we don't want to participate with him. But if we went by the Israeli narrative, Trump then saw that Netanyahu is winning and is going to take the credit. And so he jumped in and he's taking the whole credit in his press conference. Now, but there were two other issues, some of them, James, related to the point you discussed in the past hour. The first is I am less worried with Iranian orchestrated terrorist attack in the West. I am more worried with groups that may have nothing to do with Iran or less to do with Iran, but are inspired by the Shia interpretation of Islam.
Yes.
And I say this because I have studied this topic, as you know, for the past 15, 20 years, especially in Africa. And none of the groups in Africa that are terrorist groups, whether Boko Haram, whether Al-Shabaab in Somalia, whether Jenim in the Sahel, or the ISCAP in Congo, or elsewhere in Africa, the groups in Mozambique, none of them are inspired by the Shia interpretation of Islam. All of them are inspired by the Sunni misinterpretation or misappropriation of the Sunni interpretation of Islam. Now, one of the reasons why that happened was because Shia-inspired groups look at Iran and they think they have the state ISIS wanted to establish in Iran. And so the existence of Iran and its theological government took away that grievance from them, and therefore they were unable to establish a group. There are groups that are inspired by the Shia interpretation, but all of them are groups that are only there to confine themselves to their territories and to support Iran, not the kinds of ISIS and Al-Qaeda that will even delegitimize Saudi Arabia and try to attack it if they can. So I am more worried with those groups being inspired if the Iran, especially if there is a regime change, then we might see those kinds of groups. And I would think it is easier to contain a country than to contain groups that will spread across the world. And I think
we've learned that in the last 30 years, haven't we?
Exactly. And so that's what I am more worried about than an Iranian orchestrated terrorist attack. The final point, James, is related
hang on. We will have time for your final point, I promise, but I just want to make sure I've understood you completely. I think I have. So, and as you say, this is, I mean, for people who don't know, you work in de-radicalising the kind of people who fought in precisely or been members of precisely the sort of organisations that you've just described. It's just some of the work that Bulama does. Bulama Bakati, if you want to look him up and find out more about the work that he does, both on the ground and in academia. So because Iran is perceived as the promised land by the sort of ISIS ideologues, it would be toppling the regime there that would be more likely to provoke terror attacks in the West than Iran responding to what's happened now by sponsoring terror attacks in the West, because the chain of command doesn't really exist given the Shia-Sunni dichotomy.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, so ISIS and Al-Qaeda do not have a state like Iran that is inspired by the Sunni interpretation, and therefore they are saying we are fighting to build that kind of state. While the Shia extremist groups are amongst the Shiite already have Iran, and therefore they do not have that motivation, and therefore there is no need for them to orchestrate the kind. It's not just the West. Look at the devastation these groups caused in Africa.
Yes.
And it is all over Africa. And we shouldn't give them credit, but the governments that were brought down in the Sahel, all of the military governments, military juntas that took over, James, they said it was because democratic governments were unable to tackle those groups and to restore security to those countries. And what is the aim of these groups? It is to create enough instability to make democracy unviable. And they have succeeded in doing that in the case of the Sahel. They are wreaking havoc right now in Mozambique, in Somalia, in Congo, in the Lake Chad region, in Nigeria, where over 35,000 people have been killed directly and over 300,000 people killed by the United Nations report because of the consequences of the Boko Haram crisis. All of them are using a twisted, a rap interpretation of the Sunni Islam. None of them was inspired by Shiites. And my analysis is that part of that is because for Shiite groups, Iran exists and they are content with Iran.
That is fascinating and very helpful to me. I mean, it feels as if at least a couple of clouds have cleared. Can you make your final point very quickly?
Yeah, and the final point is very quick, James. Of course, I will have a final something after that. But it is that, your question was, we will never know if the U.S. strike was effective. And then when I read on Al Jazeera before the news bulletin on LBC that there was another attack on the same side by the Israelis, and I was saying if it was as successful as Trump portrayed it, why another attack on the same facility again by Israel just reported about an hour ago? And I think that's a question for all of us to ponder.
Yes,
James,
it was so successful. We had to come back 24 hours later and do more.
Yeah, James, last week 2 weeks ago, you said I left you to do my PR, but I have been trying to contact you by DM on, I know you are no longer on Twitter, but I was trying to send you some of the videos of our work, and I have written a paper on how to de-radicalize former ISIS members.
Can you stay on the line and get my email off Eleanor, my personal?
Yeah, sure.
Right,
Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Bulama, and thank you for everything you do, not least on this programme. Gosh, 11:33 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:36 is the time. Dave writes for many of you when he says, from the very first time I heard Bulama speak on your show, I sensed he was a man who was going to educate those who wanted to be educated. And there is the crucial distinction. Do you want to understand this stuff more, or do you want to pick a side and start shouting? And it's not just warmongers who fall into the second category. So sort of people who style themselves as pacifists do as well. It's a bit like industrial action. If you're opposed to every single strike ever, then you're as big a fool as somebody who is in favour of every single strike ever. And that's precisely who the Sun is talking to today, and some of their sort of broadcast equivalents. They are just saying, don't worry about understanding. Who'd want to understand things? Why do you want to understand stuff? Pick a side. We're bombing a Middle Eastern country. You're either with us or against us. Well, why are you bombing it? Oh, reasons. Could you prove those? Don't be ridiculous. Start, you flipping snowflake. Why do I need to prove my reason? Well, because Donald Trump has not necessarily proven himself to be the most reliable human being on the planet in the past. This is, of course, a guy that sought to humiliate Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office. Not, it doesn't matter. He's bombing a Middle Eastern country. What side are you going to be on? Well, I'd like to be on the side of the truth, and we don't know the truth at the moment. We have no idea, in fact, about the intelligence, if there is, quotes, any, end quotes. I don't know why I said quotes then. Do you know what I did in my head? I put an asterisk on it like you do when you're writing a text for emphasis. That's terrible, isn't it? But anyway, we don't know that there's any. Guess who says there isn't any intelligence? Yeah, the intelligence community in the United States of America. And indeed, the director of intelligence appointed by Donald Trump said there wasn't any intelligence, suggesting that they were any closer to a nuclear bomb than they were when Benjamin Netanyahu started talking about it in 1992. So why did Trump do it? Okay, got a couple of phone lines free now for the first time since about 10 past 10, actually. But on this specific question, moving away now from the questions that we asked in the first hour, why do you think Trump did it? And I mean, there is no more compelling evidence of my theory. Well, it's not my theory. There is no more compelling evidence of the simple truth that you can't use the normal tools of analysis in this, because there is no other president in the history of the United States about whom you could plausibly say, I think he did it because no one turned up to his birthday parade. I think he did it because his polls are low, which is, of course, something he said Barack Obama would do. Spoiler alert, Barack Obama didn't. I think he did it because the bloke he claimed would never be released for his opinions about Gaza got released this weekend. I think it doesn't matter how venal, how pathetic, how utterly inhumane the reason may be. If it's Donald Trump, it's plausible. Could be anything. But what do you think it was? Why did he do this? 0345 6060 973 for the 24-hour long lap of honour, but as Balama has pointed out, it barely lasted that long. If it was such a glorious success, why have Israel gone back in again? You don't need to send people to attack a site that has been, quotes, obliterated, end quotes. So why do you think he did? He did it. 20 to 12 is the time. Kieran is in Cork. Kieran, what would you like to say?
Well, I think that basically Donald Trump is engaged in the kind of populist right-wing politics of distraction, because the economy is tanking in America. The tariffs have been a disaster. The marvellous new bill is a disaster. Everyone says it.
Well, not everybody does. I don't know that the polling, the public opinion, necessarily supports your position. I mean, obviously, I agree with the introduction. He is a populist in the worst sense of the word. But is he? I don't know. I mean, a lot of the immigration stuff remains very popular. People love seeing masked men rounding up, as long as it's not their neighbours and people they actually know. Yeah. Is he really collapsing? Is he really falling apart in the way?
There are 30% of the American electorate who would believe Donald Trump, just like Nigel Farage in Britain. There are 30% of the American electorate who believe Donald Trump if he, stripped naked and ran down the centre of Washington. Like, do you know what I mean?
Of course I do, but that doesn't explain bombing Iran, does it necessarily? Who's it likely to bring back on board that was beginning to waver?
Well, what it does is it distracts from the fact that the emperor has no clothes on. It distracts from the dismantling of his image, his public image that would happen otherwise.
But his public image was all about not getting involved in Middle Eastern conflicts. I played 2.5 minutes of clips at the top of the show of him insisting he'd never do anything like this, and he was the only one that you could say that about. I mean, listen, I'm being a bit of a hostile interviewer, but
I understand.
But it's because I suppose pushing us both towards the place where we just throw our hands up in the air and say, I don't know, maybe he didn't have his breakfast or something, but that's equally plausible.
Look, ultimately, if we're looking at the ultimate objective, we are now engaged in war, or we are now engaging in a war in the Middle East collectively as the West, or we are being engaged in it to preserve the careers of both Netanyahu and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
That appears to be what we're doing here. ultimately. So it's about domestic politics in both Israel and... Because Netanyahu is going to jail if he isn't a politician, and Donald Trump is probably going to jail if he gets out of the presidency, given everything he's done. Maybe.
Well, I don't think he can he? Because he can preemptively pardon himself for everything. But and also I don't think his brain works in that way. I think he wants to be revered, and when he's not being revered, every day when he's not revered is a bad day, and that's why the big birthday parade was, I think, probably a psychological disaster for him, because it was everything that he thought he'd ever wanted, and then it happened and it was rubbish.
It looked like a disaster. It looked like a total disaster. But, I mean, the most important issue for the rest of us is that the idea that this military intervention is about liberal, democratic and human rights, or to make the West safe, is crap, and everybody knows it. Everyone in the whole world.
I don't know what Irish radio is like, but don't use that word again. Sorry. That's all right. And my apologies to anybody who was offended by it.
My apologies. That's
okay.
But, you know, I mean, even Rupert Murdoch readers can't be buying this stuff.
They can, mate. They voted for Brexit, and some of them still think it was a good idea. And they're the 30% you were talking about at the top of your call who still think that Farage might be the answer to their prayers and their problems. But, yeah, I mean, this is the problem, isn't it, with a vacuum, is that anything can move in to fill it. And when Donald Trump is the cause of the conversation, everything is equally plausible. I mean, the one thing nobody's going to say is, well, I think he's in possession of really powerful intelligence, James, that has been assembled by the CIA and Mossad, possibly with some help from MI6, and he is clearly absolutely cognizant of precisely the timescale under which Iran may develop a nuclear weapon, and he has fairly incontrovertible proof that the Ayatollah's position is sufficiently fragile at home that he would genuinely contemplate detonating one on his doorstep in Israel, and therefore so no one's going to actually provide something that sounds like a proper evidence-based, intelligence-based rationale. I say that with quite a lot of confidence. I mean, there's 15 minutes left of this hour. Ben's up next. After Ben, it could be you. But if you're going to ring in and say, like he tried to say, or that this is really tragic, that Kemi Badenoch's shadow defence secretary is saying this morning, that they agree with the justification. They haven't seen the justification. They've just heard a massive liar claim that he has a justification. You can't agree with something that doesn't exist. Unless you're James Cartledge, Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, who's having quite a morning.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question of what made Trump do it. If I were to very... what's the word I want? Unscientifically assess the messages coming in to the studio, I think the most popular explanation is the TACO one, which is it stands for Trump always chickens out. And I don't know. So talking about a narcissist, then quite possibly you are talking about someone who's going to lie awake at night worrying about the fact that he's perceived as a coward. Trump always chickens out. Most obviously, I suppose, on the tariffs. Known in diplomatic circles as the hokey-cokey of of economic policy. You put your tariff in, you take your tariff out, in, out, you shake it all about. You do the hokey-cokey and you turn around, and that's how you definitely don't get results, unless you consider a diminished and descending economy to be a result. So TACO, possibly, but I don't know. I mean, dropping bombs looks like the non-cowardly option, but I would have thought that in the context of the Pentagon, standing up to the people telling you to bomb Iran would have been the more courageous path to take. Standing up to people telling you to do whatever Benjamin Netanyahu wants you to do would be the more courageous path to take. I don't know that it's quite as clear-cut as that, but I have to acknowledge the statistics, and the statistics say that at the moment the most popular suggestion is a combination of his own ego, if you like, his own desperate thirst for approval and admiration, coupled with an attempt to undermine the widespread perception. And it cut through. Some things don't cut through. That one did, that he's a massive coward, because every time he says he's going to do something, he actually doesn't. 10 to 12 is the time. Jeffrey is in Barnet. Jeffrey, what do you think?
Good morning.
Hello, Jeff.
Well, after that, I first of all, I think that he could even have meant it when he said that no one knows what I what I'm going to do, because he didn't know what he was going to do. 24 hours later, he has the most powerful bombs, apart from a nuclear attack, that have ever been used.
Yes.
They drop out of bombers that have not been used before, and he goes down as the man who's done it. It appears a really big act. And I think that's what Trump is always looking for. He has to be top of the agenda. He has to do things that will keep him in the front of the public's eye, especially in the States, but he likes to be on the world stage when he can as well. And I find it very worrying, because I think that he brings the rest of the world with him into the possibility of a new conflagration, which could be as frightening and as dangerous as the First World War, which happened more or less unexpectedly by a series of mistakes, and the Second World War, which happened because especially of a maniac. And I think that Trump now has everyone running round him in circles, and no one, including our own Prime Minister, really, and the Europeans, are standing up to him. And the only person who does seem to be able to at the moment is Mark Carney.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that it rather focuses the mind when someone's announced an intention to annex you or occupy you. It frees you up to adopt a rather more robust position than you would adopt if you were just trying to sort of mitigate negotiations or keep someone sweet. And I was about to jump in when you started drawing parallels with the early 20th century, with the two world wars, but I'm glad I didn't, because as you reminded us, the first one in particular was a sort of very unlikely alignment of planets. The only thing I don't see, well, there's lots of things I don't see, but the most obvious thing I can't see, Jeffrey, is who would line up alongside Iran. That looks to me like a pretty flimsy network at the moment.
I suppose it isn't. There's always unpredictability. There's always complexity and unpredictability, and the ways that things connect. And at the moment, I think it's unlikely, but at the moment, the Iranian parliament has voted for closing the Straits of Hormuz.
Yes.
If they were to do that, then global chaos economically would very quickly ensue. So we're in the middle there if that were to happen, but I think the Iranians think quite long and deeply before they do anything, and therefore I think that is unlikely. But the way that these things do begin to, what was it, Kissinger's domino effect?
Yes.
It might not have been Kissinger, but the sort of American domino effect, policy recognition, I think that is something that we could very well be concerned about. And the Middle East is an area which is so volatile, where different groupings, I mean, it's in your lifetime, I think certainly in my lifetime, that we saw the Iran-Iraq war, which was devastating for both those countries, and very, very recently. So the way that these things fare up, I think, is always an unpredictability.
You can say that again. And I mean, I'm flattered that you thought even for a moment I might not have been alive for the Iran-Iraq war, Jeffrey. I'm nowhere near as young as I look. But but of course, for people being introduced to some of these questions and some of these events from the past, in the Iran-Iraq war, I use the word loosely, were on the side of Iraq. And then, of course, fast forward to the Gulf War, and we are the sworn enemies of Iraq, which speaks probably to precisely the sort of instability and inconsistency that you referenced. I think this is a silly question, but I will ask you anyway, Jeffrey. Do you think that the Middle East is more or less stable as a consequence of what Donald Trump has done over this weekend?
Considerably less stable.
Yes.
I think that, I haven't mentioned Netanyahu. I think that it is very, very hard to say who's pulling strings here. Lots of people are saying that Trump is following a Netanyahu agenda. I think that's unlikely. I don't think that Trump really is able to follow anyone else's agenda. I think he's so volatile himself and so egoistic that he's getting there. I think that's what's so dangerous. I try as much as possible to observe American politics as well, to think about what is happening in America. And it's pretty worrying.
You're a master of understatement, Jeffrey. It is pretty worrying indeed. The only time...
I know you'll pick it up, James. You'll pick it up and you'll pull it into the right shape, because that's what you do. You are able to think through, if, as I'm speaking, all the evidence about what's happening in the States, which makes it look as if things are very dangerous there.
Yes.
And violence. I mean, we saw, was it last week, the killing of, was it a senator and his wife, and the wounding of another couple? That can flare up in the States with the amount of arms that they have around very, very fast.
You're not wrong. And what I think I agree with you most strongly about is the absence of anything other than self-regard and ego when it comes to Trump's thinking process. The idea that Benjamin Netanyahu, and you don't mind me mentioning that you speak as a rabbi, Jeffrey. I've had the pleasure of speaking to you before. So when you critique Israel, you do so from a position of love and concern, as all of us try to do, but it is more obvious in your case. I don't think Netanyahu is yanking his chains. I don't think his chains are yankable, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
That's all.
And when you say that, what it brings me almost to tears, because what you said doesn't even begin to register the pain the Palestinians, Gaza, the West Bank, and now the Iranians are going through. Yes, there were bombs on Israel, but Netanyahu's quite ready for that. If he feels that he can get, and there are thoughts that he's continuing to look towards Lebanon. I read a Palestinian who was recognizing that Egypt is not very safe with Netanyahu around at the moment again. So I think it's very volatile in the Middle East.
Yes, I think you're right. I don't know anyone who would argue with you, except insofar as some people would say that it was necessary. This is a necessary price to pay for, and then you insert whatever canard you please, stability, peace, when the truth is almost certainly Netanyahu's political survival, which doesn't necessarily address the question of why Trump has done it, except, and I thought it would probably boil down to this, we may continue with the question after the news, except a personal caprice. So Jeffrey Arms opened his call by reminding us that Trump said he didn't know what he was going to do. Nobody knows what I'm going to do. Nobody knows what I'm going to do, because I don't know. I got to stop. I'm not very good at impressions. Could probably get a job on Dead Ringers. But I think that's the central point. He didn't know. So something happened in the so take that as a given, right? There'll be loads of talk about how this has been months in the planning, and we all knew exactly what we were going to do, and we had a war room, and they knew about it when Israel launched. I think that's probably true. I don't think Netanyahu would have the brass neck to undertake an attack upon Iran without telling the United States. And I don't think there was much prospect of the United States telling them not to do it. But in that little window between saying he was going to take a decision within 2 weeks and he didn't know what he was going to do, what happened to make him decide to do what he did do? It's all bets are off, aren't they?
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. It's not quite tinfoil hat territory, but if you haven't seen this, the graph from the Institute for Science and International Security about Iran's nuclear activity and the exponential expansion that occurred after Trump unilaterally withdrew from the nuclear deal that Barack Obama's administration negotiated, the JCPOA. It's truly extraordinary. It goes, to use an automobile analogy, it goes from 0 to 60 in about 10 seconds flat. So he at least contributed enormously and arguably created precisely the crisis that they've responded to. Saudi Arabia, for reasons I'll leave you to speculate on, and Israel were opposed to this deal. Because, well, again, I'll leave you to speculate as to why you wouldn't want a negotiated solution with the regime still in place to Iran's nuclear program. Grant Shapps there in the news, I think that's the name he's using this week, adding his voice to the claims that you don't need to know the facts of the matter before deciding how strongly supportive or opposed you are to something. It's highly unlikely that Grant Shapps has been shown the intelligence that Donald Trump relied upon to reach this decision, intelligence that his own director of national intelligence claims doesn't exist. But I suppose Michael Green might have been shown it, just one of the aliases that Mr. Shapps used to go by. Corrine as well, someone who can be expected to keep up with all of this. And so there it is, that idea that public consent is manufactured. And you're watching in real time the manufacturing of consent. You can do it with a so-called dodgy dossier, which is what Tony Blair's administration did. It's what Alistair Campbell still routinely faces a lot of criticism for, the manufacturing of a threat. I've said to you before, I don't think they lied. I think they believed something that wasn't true because they were so keen, they were too keen to believe it. I know 0 to 60 is slow for a car. I'm not a big petrol head, but we're talking about a period of 7 years. So 0 to 60 in 10 seconds actually works as an analogy. But if I have to explain it, then it probably hasn't worked at all. Corrine Stockheath, thank you, Davey. That was another one of Grant Shapps' aliases. So it doesn't matter, you see. So you hear Grant Shapps come out and say, we have no choice. Unfortunately, we had to bomb Iran out of its nuclear. It doesn't matter that Benjamin Netanyahu has been claiming since 1992 that the bomb was just around the corner. It doesn't matter that Donald Trump had absolutely no idea how close they are to getting a bomb when he decided to launch the attacks. And because if he did, he'd tell you. But it doesn't matter when you're in the business of manufacturing consent. You get people like Grant Shapps and James Cartledge and Michael Green and Corrine Stockheath and Sebastian Fox and the editors at the Sun newspaper and various other right-wing blowhards in the British media. It doesn't matter that there aren't any facts to support it. You're being ordered to pick a side. And those of us who refuse to pick a side until we have actually seen the detail upon which a decision is made end up looking, well, at best lonely, and at worst, I suppose, somehow sympathetic to a hideous regime like the one in Tehran. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you have grounds for bombing a foreign sovereign country, then before I decide whether I'm in favour or opposed, I need to see those grounds. I need to see those grounds. And that used to be such an intrinsic part of international law that administrations felt compelled to conjure up grounds, felt compelled to put together dossiers that later turned out not to be true because they did so in their desperation to do something. Extraordinary. And of course, as many of you are pointing out, any form of nuclear intervention by Iran would threaten Lebanon, Jordan, lots of Syria, big chunks of Egypt, never mind Palestine, just to hurt Israel. I don't know. If you believe that, then again, I'd need to see your workings and I'd need to see your evidence that Iran was contemplating such a thing. Sorry, I should have said Sir Michael Green, contributing to the news bulletin just there. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. Can you tell what we've never done? Or rather what we've not done today, something a little bit absent from our analysis so far. It may be that you don't fancy it today, but I doubt it. But we haven't had any Iranian voices on the programme. And we have not been short of Iranian voices in our conversations about this crisis as it escalated. I haven't heard any Iranian voices since it hopefully peaked, although that's looking unlikely. Despite Trump's claims to have obliterated everything, Israel are there again today, closing off access routes. And look, access is a two-way street, I suppose. access can be about getting out as well as getting in. So if they have failed to destroy the nuclear material, then perhaps Israel would claim that it is making sure that they can't rescue it or get hold of it. But also, I don't know, I call me naive, but if you've attacked a nuclear site, then attendant worries about security, words like Chernobyl appearing in people's minds. You'd have thought that having access to the site to make sure that there won't be any leakage or damage might have been quite important, but apparently not. So I'd like you to call me now if you have links to Iran, family links to Iran, and possibly insights into how this is being greeted on the ground. Because we took calls last week from people. Well, we identified two caucuses of opinion, working on the presumption that everybody who doesn't want to be part of a theocracy as opposed to the current regime in Iran, it was wrong, and I think I made this mistake myself. It was wrong to think that everybody would welcome intervention. The kind of my enemy's enemy is my friend type of scenario. We took two, possibly one call from people who felt that any casualties sustained by Iranian civilians would be a price worth paying for regime change. I'm never quite sure of the wisdom of adopting that position from the safety of exile, or from the safety of London in that case, but it is an established caucus in Iran, people who are desperate to see regime change, but who definitely do not want it to be brought about by Benjamin Netanyahu or Donald Trump, or one or the other, or a combination of both. That is clear. What I don't know is how the events of the weekend will land. The allusion now from Donald Trump, that's allusion with an A, not an I. He is now alluding to regime change. It does not appear to have been a sort of self-contained surgical strike, not least because the Israeli military has carried out airstrikes on at least one of the nuclear sites this morning. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, in their own words, in order to obstruct access routes. The way in which this is welcomed or rejected by people who want to see the regime change, want to see the Iranian administration removed, replaced, whatever word you prefer, but hadn't actually contemplated Donald Trump getting involved until he did. And of course, you can be forgiven for not contemplating Donald Trump getting involved for the reasons that Jeffrey shared with us a moment ago.
Mr. President, have you given to answer questions about whether you are moving closer, or you believe the U.S. is moving closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities? Where's your mindset on that?
I can't say that, right? You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question? Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction. Why didn't you negotiate? I said to people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago? You could have done fine. You would have had a country. It's very sad to watch this. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It's so, everyone thought it was going to be the reverse. I didn't think so. And I was telling them, you got to do something. You got to negotiate. And at the end, last minute, they said, no, we're not going to do that. And they got hit. Remember 60 days? And then came the 60. 61 is going to become a very famous number. That was one hell of a hit. That first hit. That was one hell of a hit. Not sustainable, to be honest. That's where it ended on the first night.
How would you like to sit him down and play him back some of the clips of him talking and just ask him to explain what he was saying, and then hit him again with the clip? Because he'll say, well, I was saying X, Y, Z. Then you play him a clip of him saying Q, WF. And he's like, what were you actually saying? That? Do you understand what he just said? The reason I wanted to play it is right at the top, and I'll play you the beginning of it again as I await contributions from Iranian listeners or listeners with Iranian connections. I believe this. I don't often believe anything that comes out of Donald Trump, but I believe the early bit of the answer to the question.
Mr. President, have you given to answer questions about whether you are moving closer, or you believe the U.S. is moving closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities? facilities. Where's your mindset on that?
I can't say that, right? You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question? Will you strike the Iranian nuclear
I've got a clue what he's going to do. Genuinely.
And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that...
that bit there. And I mean, as you listen to the rest of it, I think it probably swings a bit towards more likely than unlikely. But in that moment, I don't know, nobody... He finds it genuinely funny that a decision has been made. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And what happened in that moment? What happened in that, 48 hour, June the 18th, for 4 days, 3 days? Woke up yesterday morning, didn't we, on the morning of the 22nd. So say 4 days. What happened in 4 days to make him go from thinking it was funny even to think that he might have a plan to seeing him enact his plan in its entirety? Things are hotting up there again as we speak. We've already mentioned the attacks by the Israeli military on the Fordo nuclear site. I think Trump had posted something about Fordo having been completely destroyed. Iranian military has vowed a decisive response to the US. Reports of a prison, the EVIN prison in Tehran, being damaged. And Trump is continuing to talk about monumental damage to nuclear sites. So what? And all his blathering a moment ago in that clip about negotiation, just go back to the last time they negotiated properly and achieved resolution. It was a glorious success, but it was Barack Obama's success, so he undid it. But you won't hear that from the people insisting that you have to be fully supportive of what Donald Trump has done this weekend. I'm still with the question of why he did it, but I also now want to hear the opinions, the inputs, the testimonies of people who have got Iranian connections, who are Iranian, most obviously, or who have close friends and family in the region. 16 after 12 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. On it goes. On it goes. The retrospective justification, I think, is what we're going to see next. I could be wrong. I kind of hope I am, but I don't know what the alternative is. But you're just going to see a firming up of the idea that Trump has done the right thing and that he had to do it because of this threat. And those voices asking for proof of the threat are going to be faded out slowly. You just won't need to hear that. All those voices pointing out that the epic escalation in Iran's nuclear activity came about as a direct consequence of Donald Trump's deliberate policies in his first term as president doesn't fit the narrative of necessity. So they'll just be faded out ever so gently. Don't mention the fact that Trump unilaterally withdrew from the treaty that had seen Iran pretty much halt its activity in this field. And whatever you do, don't mention the fact that no one has provided any proof that the threat was any greater now than it was in 1992 when Benjamin Netanyahu first started claiming that they were mere months, weeks, or at the very most a couple of years away from creating an actual bomb. Don't listen to those people. Just stick it up your bunker. That's it. Why aren't you in favour of this? Because I haven't seen the reasoning for it. I don't know. Is it a PR victory for Vladimir Putin, who has got the Iranian foreign minister visiting him today and describes it as an absolutely unprovoked aggression against Iran? Well, he knows all about absolutely unprovoked aggression against a sovereign country on your doorstep, doesn't he? Because he does it himself on a regular basis. But I don't know who would have the moral high ground in that particular competence. And no justification. Remember, people like Farage think there was justification for Vladimir Putin to go into Crimea or Ukraine. It's some gibberish about NATO and the European Union. But Vladimir Putin now in a position of being able to accuse the United States of having undertaken a massive military undertaking with no justification. And crucially, unprovoked. Pot and kettle, eh? Pot and kettle. Sohail is in Hayes. Sohail, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Afternoon, everyone. Just basically, you just said we need the Iranian perspective. Yes. So I thought I'll be a first-time caller and give my perspective. So I've got family back home. I grew up there till I was 9. been living in the UK for 22 years now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a very difficult time for me and a lot of Iranians, Middle Eastern generally. I agree with everything you've been saying, to be honest with you. I don't think anyone has an idea what's going to happen. But I think one thing that people are underestimating is the Iranian people themselves. As much as many may not like the government for numerous reasons, whether it's foreign policy or domestic policy, they are rallying around the government. And I'm seeing that, obviously, social media is an echo chamber. We know that. But even with that, I've got family back home. I've got plenty of aunts and cousins. Pretty much all my family's still back home. And doesn't matter how much, I was telling your producer earlier, doesn't matter how much you dislike policies or, you know, what's been happening over the last couple of decades internally. When you are being bombed by a foreign nation, it could be your neighbor or my aunt getting bombed tomorrow. I am not going to cheer on that aggression just because I don't like my own government.
That was the call I struggled with most last week from a young woman who essentially was arguing the opposite, that we're so desperate to get rid of the regime that we would welcome intervention from, we were talking about Israel at the time, but that would presumably extend to the United States. I mean, I hope your family are okay.
Yeah, for now, yeah.
Good.
Hopefully.
But I guess that attitude also exists, the idea that this is such an awful regime that we may need to...
Oh yeah, but for sure. But I feel like, I mean, this is anecdotal. I don't have evidence for any of this. This is just based on my own circles and what I've been seeing and hearing from people around me. A lot of those voices that are Iranian tend to be expats who have no connection to Iran currently. A lot of them have been in Europe probably since before the revolution, especially in the US and sort of California, those sort of events. The ones that come and go, like myself, the ones like, you know, I would tell you, producer, my mum and her sister literally went for a holiday last April with, you know, my brother-in-law who's not Iranian. You know, they went and they had an amazing time. And when we have that connection to the country, when you still have links and experiences and memories that are very recent, it's very hard to detach yourself from the country and the people and even the government, because end of the day, on an average day in Tehran or Shiraz, where I'm from, you do have a normal life. You know, there is security, there is police, there's education, there's healthcare, there is services, people are going to malls and parks, and it's a normal country. It's pretty much like London or any other major city in the world. Yes, you have the eruptions, like, you know, when Mahsa Amini was killed. Those things happen, and those things are undeniable in Iran. There's a lot of problems. The government has a lot of issues, but that does not justify the aggression from outside. Iran has never been a country that accepts outside aggression. And if you look at our history, we've always resisted it. We've never been colonized through and through, whether it was the British or the Russians that tried, you know. And the context of this, I know I'm rambling on a bit, but the context is 1953. For those who don't know, Operation Ajax, CIA coup, overthrowing our democratically elected government. Why?
I was about to cite that as evidence that you had sort of succumbed to outside influence, but it's a little bit more complicated than that.
It's complicated.
Replaced a regime that was possibly unfriendly to Washington DC and London with a regime that would be more friendly and certainly would open up the pipelines, as it were. But I think back to the protests on the streets. I think back to the brutal suppression. It's a regime that tortures prisoners and locks people up on scant pretexts. The problem is that when an outsider starts dropping bombs on you, even if you hate your own government, you feel as if you're being attacked.
Well, you are being attacked.
Well, you are being attacked, yes.
It's a fact.
So this makes everything worse.
Especially when you've been seeing what's happening in Palestine prior to all of this, and Lebanon, and Yemen, and Syria. And it's like, my wife is Afghan. And when this happened last week, when Israel, we were actually abroad flying back to London on our honeymoon, and I just saw the news in my connection place in Singapore, and I started crying in the airport. And she said, "Welcome to the club."
Gosh,
you know, welcome to the club. Countries are being bombed by, you know, quote unquote, the Europeans.
Well, there's no quote unquote yet. It's still the United States.
She was like...
I just a few people picking up on what you said about London. I'll clarify it on your behalf. You're not denying the existence of torture squads or women being locked up for wearing their scarf incorrectly. But when the economy was performing well, it was a place, as with Syria under Assad, you could lead a nice-ish life.
You honestly can, and if you see there's videos online now, people walking around Tehran as we speak. There's a lot of girls without hijab on. And my mom went up. I had pictures of my mom and sister in Iran last year without hijab on, walking around. And it's, yes, when there's flare-ups, there will undoubtedly has been. You know, I'm not justifying the ringer, but like I said, like I told you, producer, my mom's family were very close to the Shah.
Right.
My granddad worked for him, so from that perspective, I've seen that side. I've heard the arguments.
You're milder than some of the other people I've spoken to. I think you're less hungry for regime change, I think.
I'm not at all, Eric, because I know the consequences of that. And if Iran's going to change, it has to be slow, gradual. And it has, from when I was there, which was a child, from what my mom talks about the revolution in 79 and the Iraq War, and the suppression and the killings that they did after the revolution against Iran dissidents to help the revolution, to now, it's a different country completely. So it's happening very, very, very slowly, and that's how it should be in a civilized society.
And that is something that we thought, it's a lesson that we thought we'd learned from the last American intervention in the Middle East. Why do you think Trump turned on this particular 6 months? There's two conflicting schools of thought here. One claims, I think the front of The Guardian today, claiming that it could have been in place for weeks. It could have been... I currently lean towards the opposite view, that he truly didn't know what he was going to do when he was recorded speaking to that journalist 4 days ago. Why do you think he's done it? Why do you think Donald Trump has done it?
I don't think he knew, but I think as the earlier caller said, the people around him knew, and it was about just convincing him of that. I think, as we've seen, Netanyahu's been trying to, talk about this since the 90s. They have been itching for an excuse, and I feel like the Iranians going to 60% enrichment as a bargaining chip, as I've been hearing analysts say, was probably a mistake on their part. I've heard the analogy given as, if you got a ball in the ring and your red flag is a 60% enrichment, you give it to them, even though you have no intention of making a bomb. Even as leverage, you've opened the Pandora's box. You've given them an excuse. And I don't agree with it, obviously. I think it's still a stupid thing to do, but start bombing Iran. But Iran has to, I think, take responsibility for that mistake. And once that started, I feel like Netanyahu was just, rubbing his hands in glee.
Yes, again, well, given a kind of open door to rush through. Although I think I stick to my theory on why he rushed through it at the moment that he did. It had absolutely nothing to do with anything going on in Iran, and everything to do with how the world was beginning to view and talk about what was going on in Gaza. The New York Times. Thank you, Sahel. That was really helpful. I've got half an hour left, so there's room for more people with. More Iranian people of Iranian heritage and extraction, to tell me how you feel about what has happened to your country in the last 48 hours. I mentioned The Guardian's analysis suggesting that it could have been a very long gestation period. So Hell suggesting that there may well have been people around Trump who were a lot more hawkish on this than Trump himself was. Until I get evidence to the contrary, I will continue to subscribe to the idea that he didn't have a clue what he was going to do until he suddenly did, and that something happened over the space of the 4 days prior to Sunday morning. And it is to the New York Times that I turn in support of that position. And this is the most compelling, knowing what we know about the man. I think that what the New York Times is reporting this morning, I think since we came on air actually, may be the most compelling explanation as to if he did indeed turn on a sixpence and change his mind in that very small window. The New York Times has an explanation that I find simultaneously terrifying and entirely plausible. And I will share that with you after the very latest news headlines with Tim Humphrey.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:32 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I forget sometimes what I've said to you, and I get these messages coming into the studio that, what on earth is this about? Someone texted the wrong programme. But yeah, I am familiar with some of the other side effects of beetroot consumption. So thank you to everybody who has warned me in advance of what might be likely to happen in the course of this afternoon. I eat a lot of beetroot. Never stops being shocking, but I do eat a lot of beetroot. So I don't really need, but thank you for your concern. This is really interesting. Look me in the eye and tell me that you think this is implausible. So the New York Times is reporting now, and I need to actually thank you. I should actually, perhaps you sometimes think I exaggerate, but if you bring stuff to my attention, via text or WhatsApp or Blue Sky, then it will often make its way onto the programme. But this isn't the BBC. There's just me and Eleanor, essentially, and she's on the phones most of the time. Keith's usually very busy doing things with buttons, and Rebecca spends the entire 3 hours that we're on air answering phones. So in terms of actually noticing stuff that's going on outside the studio, it's mostly just me. No one, that's not an exaggeration. I mean, unless no one's ringing me, in which case we're all looking at each other going, why is no one ringing me? Which means we're not remotely interested in what's going on outside the studio, except insofar as why you're not ringing me. But that tends not to happen anymore. Oh, I've jinxed it. It'll happen tomorrow. So if you think there's something I need to know, send it to me, which is what Carolyn has done. And this is an extraordinary piece in the New York Times this morning, that Trump's decision to bomb Iran may well have been motivated in large part by the way that Netanyahu's attacks upon Iran were playing out on Fox News. He marvelled to advisers, reports the New York Times, about what he said was a brilliant Israeli military operation which involved a series of precision strikes that killed key figures in Iran's military leadership and blasted away strategic weapons sites. Mr. Trump took calls on his cell phone from reporters and began hailing the operation as excellent and very successful, and hinting that he had much more to do with it than people realise. Later that day, Trump asked an ally how the Israeli strikes were, quotes, playing, end quotes. He said that, quotes, everyone, end quotes, was telling him he needed to get more involved, including potentially dropping 30,000-pound GBU-57 bombs on Fordo, the Iranian uranium, there's a tongue twister waiting to be written, the Iranian uranium enrichment facility buried underneath a mountain south of Tehran. The president was closely monitoring Fox News, which was airing wall-to-wall praise of Israel's military operation and featuring guests urging Mr. Trump to get more involved. What were me and Theo talking about an hour and a half ago? One of us should have watched Fox News, because if the sun is going in on the scale that the sun is going in on, then God only knows what Fox News is doing in regard to this. And now we know. Mr. Trump got several guests urging Mr. Trump to get more involved. Several Trump advisors lamented the fact that Tucker Carlson was no longer on Fox, which meant that Trump was not hearing much of the other side of the debate. Tucker Carlson, the disgraced former Fox presenter who has resurrected his career partly via visits to the Kremlin, most spectacularly, and who is, surprisingly perhaps for someone who resurrected his career partly through a visit to the Kremlin, very much opposed to the attacks upon Iran. So the contention here is that Trump based his decision, that 4-day window in which he appeared to turn on a sixpence, will have involved watching television. How did we not think of that? How did no one come up with the idea that he was just watching telly and thought, God, Netanyahu's getting a lot of love from the people on Fox News? That's where I used to be. I used to be the one getting all the love. How come he's getting all the love? I should be getting all the love from the people on... Stop doing accents, James. You're very, very bad at it. So that's why he did it. Yeah, look me in the eye and tell me that's impossible. Go on. Unbelievable. 12:36 is the time. Back to the Iranian response. Majid is in Hammersmith. Majid, what would you like to say?
Hi. This is the first phone call, so I'm happy.
Take your time.
I would like to say, first of all, that against the attack over Iran by Netanyahu, which is that definitely brings hate and upset from Iranian people towards the West and Netanyahu more and more. And nothing brings just the destruction of the country, not freedom. And the people know that in Iran, back home and over here too, that is completely lie. And then over Trump, when he destroyed that Fordo, all I found out that in 2015, when the Iran had agreed with the limit his enriched uranium up to 3.5%, and the whole world knew, and this agreement was done. Donald Trump tear it apart. We don't know why over the business, but we know that Iran would never ever have the nuclear bomb, because we all know that the enriched uranium can produce electricity. This is all about the money. You can rely on your country.
I think there's a level at which that becomes untrue. There's a journey from enrichment to weapons grade where I don't think it holds that it is exclusively usable only for power generation. And the regime, the administration, hasn't denied nuclear ambition. It's just a question of how close they were to achieving it and how confident we were that they'd use it in the future. And I think that a lot of people, the answers to those questions are changing in their minds even as the situation unfolds. A lot of people are pretending to believe that the threat was much more acute in order to justify what Donald Trump has done. So you would like to see regime change?
Not actually. I would like the regime to change their mentality over people, but not complete regime change, because that brings nothing for us. Just I meant from within. It's an unfortunate phrase, isn't it? Because it makes you think of bombs, not revolutions. But definitely.
You're not going to. Oh, right. So you don't want the Ayatollahs to be in charge.
No. What I'm saying, it's not about Ayatollah or the president or no. What I'm saying, if anything happened to this regime right now, this brings up nothing after that, because what's going to happen next is we've got too many different culture and like Kurd, Arab in south, Kurd on right, and we have Turk. They all want to be independent. They want to take the country apart. It's going to be fall apart. So Iran would be left with nothing. What I'm saying, in the future, is not good for Iranian people to take the regime off, but until the mentalities change.
Okay.
What I'm saying, the mentality over the people should be changed, not
just the way they ruled. Well, I don't know that a theocracy. I don't know if a theocracy can change the way that it rules, but it doesn't undermine in any way your desire to see it happen. In terms of public opinion, what do you think this will do? Sohail earlier suggested that even people who hate the regime are going to feel under attack from without, and that leads to a kind of solidarity in Iran that was not there before.
Yes, right. What I said, that the attack over Iran and destruction that brings hate towards West and Netanyahu, and the people stick with the government. So right now, when they call from back home, they scared every night. They can see the fire over the sky all the night. What is that? What Israel is trying to do? They bring more hate to themselves. This is all. They keep saying it that we bring freedom for Iran, and we all know it's rubbish. This is not right.
And it's got a touch of deja vu to it when we think of previous justifications for US intervention in the Middle East. How much closer have we moved to the possibility of regime change with no day after plan? Which is, I think, what underpins Majid's concerns. That is something that we know the answer to. What happens when a state is toppled or an administration is toppled by outside forces who haven't put any plan in place as to what would happen next. I recommend journalists, as often as I can. Nesri Malik in The Guardian today is outstanding on this, talking essentially about the rather meaningless, hollow calls for diplomacy, because the cause of the war ultimately, notwithstanding Trump's involvement is, I'm drawn to that theory that it's just a popularity contest inspired by Fox News coverage, but it was already underway, of course, and that is about, that's all about Benjamin Netanyahu, not even about Israel. It's all about Benjamin Netanyahu, the never culpable super sovereign regime in Israel. 12:42 is the time. Susan is in Shepherd's Bush. Susan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Susan.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're
Sorry,
very
I'm
welcome.
very, very nervous.
It's only me.
Yes, I know. Yes, I just talked with my family yesterday, very briefly, 5 minutes, because the internet isn't good. And madly, they were happy. And they were like let Israel hit them harder.
So your family's not in Tehran, I suspect.
I have some family, my uncles, my cousins, my niece in Tehran, and they didn't leave Tehran. They're still there.
And they're happy about the bombardment? The ones in Tehran?
Yes, actually, my family live in another city in West and called the other ones to come here is safer, but they said for now they are okay. But my family completely, they are going by day-to-day life.
Yes, no, I hear you. And this, I suppose, is the crux of it, isn't it? Is that the desire to see the regime removed is so acute that you don't care who helps, or they don't care who helps.
The thing is that for Iranian people, sadly, James, everything is happening to us. We don't have saying on anything. We didn't want to have nuclear energy or anything.
Yes.
They never had vote for that. And they spent so much money and energy and resource to build those facilities, and now all gone. And we don't have anything. If we go for revolution, we get killed. If we don't go, we have war and get killed.
God, I hadn't thought of it like that.
Yes, I mean. But
so, what are they celebrating then? What are they celebrating in the current conflict?
They're celebrating that this Revolutionary Guard is getting a hit because. They just don't think about Iranian people. They all energy and everything is on foreign policy and how to arm, I don't know, their proxies and anything. And just Iranian people have left on their own. That's the fact and the sad reality going on in Iran.
I'd say you feel abandoned by everybody. Including your own administration. So anything that may change the status quo is to be welcomed, even if it doesn't, because the alternative is a guaranteed continuation of what is going on now. I thank you for that, Susan. I'm so glad you were listening today, because I don't think it serves anybody to paint the Iranian position as homogenous. Everybody there must either be a die-hard supporter of the administration or so diametrically opposed to it that they would welcome intervention from anybody, including the US and Israel, or a voice we've heard more often, which is why I'm glad you were here, the people insisting that they want change, but change must come from within. We never do we? This isn't a criticism, it's just an observation, because I think it applies equally to humans through the ages, not at any particular history point or geographical location. Never learn anything from what's happened to anybody else, ever. Even if it's in the next door country or the next door house, you never learn anything from what has happened to anybody else. You can point out all the lessons of history, and you can point out precisely none of them ever being learned. The only lesson that we ever learn from history is that nobody ever learns any lessons from history.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. A quick thank you to Ray for reminding me of something I'd forgotten to tell you about. Ray writes, I'd like to send you a love cake. Good Lord, man. To celebrate, I think you mean, that leaving that elite club, the EU, 9 years ago today. It's a great feeling. Ray, my apologies if you're dyslexic, but that is not how you spell celebrate, or indeed great. Never mind elite. But perhaps typically for someone on your side of the political fence, we left the European Union at 11 p.m. on the 31st of January 2020, Ray. But hey-ho. That's not an opinion, it's just counting. What I did want to tell you, though, was that the OBR, on the 9th anniversary of the Leave vote, which I think is what Ray is referring to, the OBR has seen its estimate of a 4% loss in the UK's long-run productivity, borne out by declining investment and trade volumes. That 4% productivity loss has translated into approximately £40 billion of tax losses for the Exchequer between 2019, or when we actually left, and 2024. So, well done, Ray. Yeah, you can by all means celebrate the £40 billion tax hole in the public finances caused by Brexit. And that, you have to turn to page 29 of the Times to find that reported today, as opposed to many other stories a little higher up on the news agenda that were arguably a little bit less important. Back to Iran. Well, actually, no. We're off to Toronto to speak to a British Iranian who now lives in Canada. Mehrdad, what would you like to say?
Hello, mate.
Hello. There you go, the international language of Brits. Hello, mate.
Oh,
all right, mate. Carry on.
All right. So I know it's only you, but it makes me nonetheless nervous.
Of course.
So, all right. So what I wanted to say was to voice a lot of people that sort of are going to be saying the same thing. People around me who I've been talking to, and we. To put it in a bit of a context, I have got to know LBC and followed yourself since just after the 2016 vote, and I agree with almost anything that you say about Trump, about Netanyahu, and all that. However, I think this is the push that the Iranian people need. I mean, we all know how oppressive the regime is, and what it does to the people who dare to kind of bring their head above the parapet. And what they, the latest uprising about 3 years ago, mass Armenian stuff. They brutalize everyone. They won't even. People of Iran won't even stand a chance to do the uprising on their own. So this is the force that we need, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the absence of anything else, it's going to have to come from outside. It looked with the Mahsa Amini protests that it might come from within, but it didn't. I have Iranian friends who really thought that they were on the brink of overthrow, on the brink of revolution, but it didn't happen. So this could provide. It's a moment, isn't it, in which the Iranian people will see an opportunity. I kind of hope you're right. I hope the cost isn't too high. But what about the worries involving the absence of a plan for what happens afterwards?
There is an alternative, albeit there's the same kind of
go on.
I did tell you that I was nervous.
Yeah, don't worry. You take your time. Seriously, it's only me.
Thanks. Obviously, that's true. The thing is, there is the Shah's son, whom I personally think is the best candidate at the moment. Okay. And he's expressed a lot of the time that he's not, well, he's going to be helping for the due process, right? So for a few months, maybe, until somebody kind of comes along and people get a chance to actually vote for what they wish. So in the meantime, he's actually expressed that he's ready to step up to the plate. And
he started appearing on TV, hasn't he? He's assumed a kind of social media presence as well. I think he wrote that this month the Islamic Republic has reached its end and is collapsing. What has begun is irreversible. The future is bright, and together we will navigate this sharp turn in history. Now is the time to stand, the time to reclaim Iran. May I soon be by your side.
Yes.
Do we know what that would look like? Not necessarily his triumphant return to Tehran, but this idea that the Iranian people, and most, I mean, listen, the plural of anecdote is not data, but most of the people I've spoken to are desperate for regime change, but not desperate enough to want anything to do with Benjamin Netanyahu or Donald Trump. So, like Susan, the previous caller who'd been speaking to her Iranian family, you're part of the other caucus, the other constituency. But what I can't quite see is the bridge between the current conflict and the successful overthrow of the Ayatollah, that how the Iranian people, what they jump on or what door is kicked open by Netanyahu and Trump that they can then rush through. So,
in my humble opinion, what the course that Israel and Netanyahu in particular have actually threatened is to actually I'm just looking for the right proper
destabilize.
So what he's doing is that he's getting rid of almost all of the legs that the regime is standing on, including the.
So they become so weakened that they become easier to topple over. I mean, that is what today has been about. Mehrdad, because I see that as being a completely compelling analysis, just as I see the earlier callers explaining that actually this would harden support for people who hate the regime but would feel that they were somehow under attack themselves. An Iranian who feels that they are under attack is going to be reluctantly or even emotionally more supportive of whoever is currently in charge as they are under attack than they were previously. You can simultaneously want the regime to change but not want it to have anything to do with external factors, any external factors. I find each position equally persuasive, which is why on a slightly different tip we opened the programme this morning by pointing out how dangerous it is to prioritise getting a strong opinion above having understanding and facts. I hope we've done a little bit today with the help of callers like Mehrdad and everybody else to address that problem of stick it up your bunker, urging people without any facts at all, up to and including the Shadow Defence Secretary, who understands and agrees with Trump's justification for the attacks, even though Trump hasn't really provided it. And it may well yet turn out simply to be his rather excitable response to watching Fox News. I can give Mohammed in Hackney 1 minute. I hope it's enough for you to say something interesting, Mohammed, but there's no pressure.
Sure, James. I will just quickly 2 points. One is go to the Trump first. He just done it for himself as a legendary. He wants to be a president so that people can remember him, like a Bush, like a Clinton, Gulf War.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's one, because wherever the negotiation was going to go with them, he was escaping from negotiations, so the decision was taken for. That's the first of all.
He didn't want to share the credit, was probably the best explanation I've heard.
Absolutely. He's like a child. He's like a child. You tell him not to eat, and then after they say, oh, why I say that, and then try to eat, and then he stops. He becomes stubborn, and he doesn't want to do that anymore. So it's just like, but the second point, I believe, is an awful regime. I'm originally from Syria, but I do have peoples in Iran, and Iraq and Turkey and Syria as well. So negotiating for anyway, sorry, not negotiating. I mean, like every family in Iran, you will see, and with the sun is rising. Everybody, political family, they said, "Oh, I hope he's not going to be my son or my brother. He's going to hang down middle of Tehran by the crane." And that's one of them. But that's not how. That's not what is going to happen. And the regime, you just like Trump was saying, like change the regime. We're just warming up the people before the attack. And I believe is nobody in the Middle East, they like that the regime don't want to change. Well, that is
actually, you and Mehrdad and a couple of others have perhaps answered the question I began the programme thinking was unanswerable. So what would constitute proof of success? It's not about Iran's capability. If it does somehow catalyse a revolution from within, then credit where credit's due. That would be down to the recent interventions, at which point, of course, the memory of Iraq kicks in and you find yourself wondering whether that would be a good thing in the absence of a plan for what happens the day after. Holy moly. A quick heads up, you might want to buy a T-shirt or book yourself some bunting. It's Daniel Hannan Day tomorrow. We will be celebrating Daniel Hannan Day in full tradition, full pomp and circumstance, costumes, flags, the whole works. So do not miss Daniel Hannan Day. Whatever you do, if you miss any of today's show, listen back on Catch Up on Global Player and the new LBC app, where you can read and watch the latest from LBC. Put your news categories in the order you want, as well as pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now, happy Daniel Hannan Day Eve to Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.